All right. Hello and welcome, everyone. It is 2023, and it is time once again for the full roster Warframe review. Of note, before we get started, I put out a video recently that is linked in the description below and should also be in the pinned comment that goes over how I grade things and what I feel is important for frames whenever I assign them a grade. We are, of course, going to talk about every single frame, but if you want a general scope of what I am thinking about and looking at, there's a whole video that dives deep into that now for you to check out. In addition to that, this video is going to be on, and all the grades are going to be posted publicly on brozyme.com. So if you've not been over there, there's a bunch of guides and everything that you can access from there, including but not limited to all of my most recent build videos for every single Warframe. I spent a lot of last year going through and refreshing the builds of every single frame. So, have access to all of that business. And speaking of brozyme.com and the site and all of this business, thank you very much to all of the people that are supporting me on Patreon over at patreon.com/brozyme and so on and so forth. It is very much appreciated and helps do this whole thing, I suppose. With all of that out of the way, and if you need to know how I grade things, you can go watch the video. As I said, let's get into the review of all these Warframes. As usual, we are going in alphabetical order, and also I should have timestamps along the bottom of the video for each individual frame this year, because that's some nice new functionality we've gotten from YouTube. Let's get into it. Starting out, as is usual, with Ashe. Ashe is a pretty consistently well-performing Warframe. Obviously, in the far-flung past, we had the meta where his 4 was kind of the whole thing, and was used to clear maps very quickly and do stuff like that. But in current times, we have a sort of stronger but also weaker version of where Ashe has been in the past. With the way that the game has gone, with Steel Path being introduced and these much higher numbers being required of players, Ashe has been able to keep up, mostly through helmeting Banshee's ability, and using that alongside his very good finisher damage and his passive, which allows him to have much better slash procs. All of that stuff he has been able to keep up with. I have long felt, though, personally, that Ashe's teleport and also Bladestorm need a few changes in order to really bring him up into the upper echelons of the stellar, amazing, great Warframes. And right now, I feel like he's just at a good level. He's at a very solid B+, I would say. But he is not useless. He is not far away from being competent. He's actually particularly very good at disruption, which is an important game mode. That is part of why he's got his plus, as he is fantastic with that Banshee helmet ability I mentioned, at just using his 4 to just eliminate disruption targets and do thousands of millions of damage to any enemy that he looks at, albeit a bit clunkily, because the way that currently the Blade and Mark system of Bladestorm works is just generally a bit slow for where Warframe is right now. Hopefully, in the future, maybe we could see Bladestorm not need to be activated twice, and you would just turn it on, and then the shadows would do their thing. But as it stands right now, having to mark a bunch of enemies and then use the execution and then have all of the animations play out with your clones is just kind of a bit slow on the clear side, even though it does do significant damage. On Teleport's part, Teleport has all the makings of a truly great movement ability, except for that it needs a target for you to teleport to. If this was ever made targetless, it would be one of the best movement abilities in the game, and it would be extremely strong. It would basically just be a solo version of Nova's teleport, or Nova's portal, rather, and that would be extremely, extremely good. And also, it being solo wouldn't be such a big thing, as Ashe has kind of, I would say, a reputation for being popular among people who play solo. Also, Smokescreen. Smokescreen is a low-duration version of invisibility that all of the other invisibility frames have. It is, I would say, nearly the worst invisibility. There's, Wisp's is debatably better or worse, as hers has a lot of parameters that she needs to meet in order to keep it. But for Smokescreen, the duration is just such a mess on this, and we usually use Arcane Trickery, which is triggered off of his 4 in order to maintain invisibility longer term. And we have Shuriken. Shuriken, not used in its regular form, but with its augment for armor stripping, that gives Ashe access to armor stripping. Of note, that armor stripping is not particularly relevant, as Slash ignores armor, and this, as a subsume on other frames, needing the augment makes it just a worse version of other choices in the helmet system. But overall, Ashe at a very solid B+. I think Ashe is extremely useful and well placed in most content, but he just falls short of just more optimal options for the things that we have available and want to be doing. But he performs very well. Atlas, the absolute punchman himself. Atlas has received some changes since the last roster review, but he is mostly just a landslide bot, where you are going to spam landslide absolutely as much as you possibly can, because this is how you're going to deal DPS if you're going to be using his abilities. You're just going to dash from enemy to enemy, spamming one, punching them, dealing millions of damage if you're fully invested, and being able to clear enemies relatively quickly. Of note, and part of the problem with landslide, is that there are a good chunk of enemies that you are not allowed to target with landslide, making Atlas pretty much completely useless for all of the content where landslide does not function, which is rough. In addition to that, if you aren't using landslide, I find that Atlas has a considerable trouble surviving in high-level content, where you can, of course, just use Petrify to pause all of the enemies, but with the new Eximus changes, they aren't going to get petrified and can just kill you if you're not using landslide. This, in general, makes Atlas extremely, extremely one-note. Not having access to some other form of survivability other than dashing around with landslide, or, well, no other form of good survivability other than dashing around with landslide, puts you in a position where if you're not doing landslide stuff, you probably shouldn't be Atlas, which is rough for general use content, and also means that he's not really like a new player-friendly frame or anything else, because you need to be all in and have a landslide build to get anything going. Also, the Rumblers, absolutely completely useless. They are a couple of dumbass rock friends that are cool looking, but do effectively absolutely fucking nothing. All of the augments for this are not worth using. The one where you put the Rumbler on as armor, you would think would be good, but it is too heavily restricted to really matter in any way, and also does not provide enough defense, as you're just really not getting enough out of it, and as I said, it is just far too restricted. Then we have Tectonics, which just puts up a wall. There are cases in the game where this can essentially break AI or prevent AI from doing a thing they need to do, but, like, those use cases are so few and far between, and in pretty much any case where you could do that, you could very simply be another Warframe that does that job, but better. So, overall, unfortunately for Atlas, I am going to give him a C. Usable, but there's a lot of downsides there, and I think he's fun, but that doesn't get you anywhere here, unfortunately. Banshee, another unfortunate case, I would say. Banshee has all of the makings of a Warframe that could do a lot, and those makings are specifically Sonar. Sonar, you can spam a ton and create weak points that give you a huge damage multiplier that stack with itself and just give you absolutely outrageous, unbounded damage on enemies you can already kill. On enemies that you would ever want this ability, with the exception of Liches and Sisters of Parvos, which she is very good for hunting, these won't work. This does not work on Archons. It does not work on, like, the most bosses. Bosses that have weak points, Sonar does not make those weak points take more damage. You'll sometimes just get spots on their parts of their body that are completely immune to damage. And it is overall just a very clunky way to do things. And combine that with Banshee's very questionable survivability, with using silence to stun enemies, and then almost always replacing Sonic Boom with Gloom to make it so that you can get that stun a very, very long time. Because that stun is affected by the slow from Gloom, enemies will be stunned for a long time. All that being said, it's all still very questionable, and even more questionable with the Eximus involved. Them not being able to be crowd controlled means that they can just look at Banshee and just very simply kill her. And on top of all of this, Soundquake is not an ability you want to be using right now. It doesn't deal enough damage that it is like a good low to mid-level farm as compared to other options, and it doesn't scale at all into Steel Path. It is effectively not an ability on Banshee's kit, because you're just always going to be using whatever you subsume. I guess you could subsume over Soundquake and keep Sonic Boom, but also Sonic Boom is not really an ability. You can put an armor strip on this, but the whole Warframes thing is that they multiply damage so much, that they basically just have damage cap all the time. And once you're doing that, why bother stripping armor, especially if it needs a mod slot in your build? So, a Warframe that effectively has 2 dead ability slots, and the other 2 are pretty iffy. That being said, her silence is very well used on Ashe. Unfortunately for Banshee, Ashe uses it better than her, and she is a C rank Warframe. She's fine, you can definitely get stuff done, but you really probably should pick someone else. Okay, let's talk about Baruuk. Baruuk, having very, very recently received his Prime, is an absolutely excellent Warframe. There is a lot going for Baruuk, and one of the few things that is problematic for Baruuk is that there are not enough enemies in this game for him in most content, and also he is way stronger. Like, he needs so many enemies because he is so good at killing large crowds of dudes. And for general use content, even if he doesn't get to use his thing that requires large crowds, he's basically completely unkillable and immune to everything enemies do. Even without his meter, which you need to manage in order to be able to use Serene Storm, and just absolutely bash your way through enemies, you just are invincible because you're building around Desolate Hands, or in some cases, you're building around Elude. Desolate Hands gives you a huge amount of damage reduction, and it also gives it to your companions and teammates, all of which is very nice and seldomly appreciated by them, but it is very nice. And we're using Lull, which can also be a nice crowd control option, but is also usually used with heavily negative duration to build meter much more quickly, especially when you have access to fewer enemies. Elude is usually what we're going to put a helmet ability over, but some people do like to use it. This just basically says you are completely invincible as long as you are not attacking, and that's great. And you can use this to build meter, but usually if you're going the heavily negative duration, it's not really maintainable alongside that negative duration will give you way more drain. You're going to end up just like removing this. I removed this for Styanax's ability, but there are lots of good options, and even something as simple as Empower for the extra 50% strength, both on your 3 and on your 4, are going to be more than fine. Baruuk is an absolute powerhouse, and the only reason he is getting an A- is because for a large amount of the content, having to build up to his 4 and then getting to use it is just like a bit clunky. Or in content where there just aren't enough enemies, you basically don't get to use your very powerful, very good 4, and you end up just being super invincible and can't die, which is still very, very good. But those just few problems I find with keeping up Serene Storm, especially in much easier content, are the reason I'm docking him just a little bit, but an absolutely fantastic Warframe. Did anyone else forget about this guy? This is Caliban. He was the Warframe that released with the new war. And then everyone forgot that he existed very, very quickly, and for very, very good reason. This Warframe does little to nothing. Like, to be entirely honest, he does little to nothing. The basic gist of what Caliban is offering is that he is going to summon some Conculists that are going to try and constantly give you shields. Now, if there was any consistency to that, where you could summon these guys and they would always be giving you shields as long as you stayed within like a certain distance of them, that would mean that Caliban would have really consistent access to basically infinite shield gate survivability, and that would be really good. But these dumbasses, much like Atlas's dumbasses, do not just give you shields. They spin around and do all this shit and don't give you shields, which is the only thing they should be doing ever, and you have no capacity to command them to do that. So, because they do it right when they get summoned, you end up spamming the shit out of this ability, and it is just fucking annoying to try and survive that way as Caliban. Meaning that this ability is horrible. Like, just horrible to have on and cost this much energy, because as much as you need to spam it in order to actually use it as survivability, not to mention, in higher level content, these things just die anyway, and to be fair, it takes a while. Most of the time, they're pretty good at surviving, but it's just all around annoying to survive as Caliban. In addition to that, what else could he be bringing to the table? Because, of course, we just talked about that Banshee has survivability issues. That stuff can come up, although she has similar issues, or similar qualities of crowd control, because we have Sentient Wrath. Sentient Wrath sends out a wave, and it lifts enemies. This is annoying because it just makes it usually harder to kill enemies, but you do, of course, get a small damage vulnerability on them, which is okay. But, unfortunately, for some reason, even though this is Warframe, this has a max targets limitation. So, for no reason, this is limited to 6 at base, which is, well, it's actually not 6 at base, because that's the low rank one. I think it's 15 whenever it's max rank. Regardless, max target stuff, it's not been good. It should not be a thing in Warframe to have a max targets. It's absolutely outrageous that some frames have this restriction and others don't. Either do it to everyone and make all the abilities shitty, or remove it from everybody, because this is just an awful crowd control ability. And Caliban will use it because he ain't got nothing else. And then we have Razor Gyre, which is this one. You spin around and you do the shitty version of what Revenant does. This sucks even at low levels, like low mid levels. It's really underwhelming. And then you have his 4, which is arguably a good ability. This is a super, super long cast time for an armor strip. And the armor strip is fine. You're going to get a full armor strip very easily from this, but it's a super long cast. And it doesn't do nearly as much damage as the little video it shows here. Like, these are like level 20 enemies he's doing this to in this little video it shows you. Overall, the whole thing that he's got going on is just worse versions of what a bajillion other frames do. It's just sad, and honestly, he could have really easily been left out of the new war update, and I don't think that update would have been any worse for it. So yeah, unfortunately, Caliban can't even muster the first letter of his name. He's a D rank Warframe. Absolutely, just not great. Just bad. You guys, the moment he leaves the screen, you guys are gonna forget about him though. Not a big deal. Don't worry about it. Just pretend you never saw this part. Chroma. It has been a long, hard life for Chroma. Over time, he has been the meta for Eidolons. He has, seen his use case as a basically, unkillable frame that is so strong and does so much damage and all these things. And all of that stuff has not been aging well. The big thing about Chroma has always been Vex armor, where you get the armor increase and the damage increase. And that's great. Unfortunately, the damage increase is a serration style effect, which means the damage increase number you get from this is not double damage after all of your other modifiers. This is added to the number you have on your serration effects, which means you have your serration, you have your like galvanized shot type effects for your condition overload effects, you have the merciless and like the Deadeye arcanes and all that stuff. All of those really huge numbers that have gotten much bigger, especially recently, are additive with the number Chroma gives. And even though Chroma can give a pretty considerable number, that number is exponentially worse when we have more access to it and can use other frames that have a ton of access to that and offer a multiplicative bonus, such as Rhino. What that ends up meaning is that Vex armor is not the best way to deal damage to these big targets. In fact, in most cases, that content has actually been taken over by Volt at this point. Without going too deep into that, Vex armor survivability also has not scaled particularly well in this heal path, and while Chroma can absolutely survive, because he just survives on a ton of armor and not that much health usually, what ends up happening is you just get eaten away by slash procs very, very quickly, and you will still die pretty early on in Steel Path with not much to show for it, because you have this Serration style damage buff, which is a good decent amount of damage, and then your 2 gives you a variety of buffs. Usually you're on cold for more armor and like the damage reflection and like all that good business. But it's really just kind of middling. You can add more heat for, of course, the health increase and such like that. Cold and heat are usually what you're going to be on. Sometimes toxin, some people like that, but not me personally. And electricity is actually used on another frame that we're going to talk about later. But otherwise, Chroma has a 1. And that's about all the positive things I have to say about Chroma's 1. It doesn't really do anything of note at all. It's horrible. And you're never going to press this button. And then you have Effigy. And this button, in 99% of content, is absolutely, completely fucking worthless. Just absolutely nothing. Just a nothing ability. This doesn't do anything, except in Profit Taker. In Profit Taker, which is the best credit farm in the game, this doubles the amount of credits you get at the end of killing Prophet Taker. And for that reason alone, I am not giving Chroma a lower grade. I am giving Chroma a B-. This frame has aged very, very poorly, and let's be honest, they've always been really poorly designed. They've never really felt like a dragon, which is their theme. They have much more so just been a guy who's got a buff WoW, and that buff is getting worse every day. Moving on. All right, let's talk about Ember. Ember has received some changes over the last little while. She got her rework, which has been great for her. She has been a very just solid all-around Warframe that can do a bunch of different content very well, and the armor strip changes have actually affected her reasonably positively because she no longer needs to be at max heat in order for her Fire Blast to be an effective piece of armor reduction, which is great. That means that she has access to like a much better armor strip that is going to be more effective in most cases. Her Inferno does enough damage to kill Steel Path enemies, with the very recent addition of Archon Vitality doubling up the damage of that essentially, and just making it so you can just burn through enemies on Steel Path or wherever else very, very easily. And then, of course, we have Immolation, which is her survivability skill. This, very easy to upkeep, very easy to charge up. A little annoying because you have to turn it off and turn it back on, and because if you keep it at the max, it will give you a huge energy drain. Personally, I've always thought that this should be a reward system ability with the DR as opposed to a punishment system for getting too hot as the Fire Warframe. But even considering that, this is a very strong DR ability that's going to keep you very, very safe in all content. In addition to that, she has Fireball. Usually, this is the slot that you're going to put a Subsume over. However, with its augment, this can be a very significant elemental damage buff, and Heat is the best single element in the game right now. So adding a ton of that and then doing a ton of heat procs, you get a ton of damage. And for those reasons, and because Ember is good in pretty much all content, with the unfortunate exception of the content that she was supposed to be really good at, which is Elite Sanctuary Onslaught, where you're not allowed to DPS with her 4, which is the thing that she was built to do. So outside of ESO, she is doing very well. And maybe not the most optimal choice, but definitely a very wide-ranging, great choice for really all content, and especially low-level farms where she can just blow through anything that exists. Yeah, and with that, she's an A-rank Warframe. Very, very good. Just good stuff all around. Maybe a little, personal distaste in the design for me on my part, but that doesn't really hurt her here. You want to talk about a frame that used to be much better? Okay. Let's talk about a frame that used to be much better. It's Equinox. Equinox has 7 abilities because Equinox is 2 different Warframes. She has Rest and Rage, she has Pacify and Provoke, and she has Mend and Maim, which she can use Metamorphosis to switch between her day and night forms, getting one ability or the other, with the left side on night and the right side on day. In the past, Maim was used as a big giant AoE where you could bring 4 players with Corrosive Projection, remove all armor from the mission, and then very, very easily build up enough damage to constantly nuke the map. This would result in, if you brought 2 Equinoxes, you would do a build known as Patty Cake, where you would have 2 Equinoxes basically to stand next to each other and wipe the map, and then wipe the map, and then wipe the map, and then wipe the map, and so on and so forth. And that was, for a long time, very good. Unfortunately, with the current armor changes and the nerfs to Corrosive Projection, that is not a thing that she gets to do anymore. And Maim is still, like, fine. You can do that, and it's gonna, be like a map wipe every once in a while, but it takes a bit to get going. And with that, she doesn't have a lot else to do. Rest is very good for a number of different farms where you can do, like, your huge affinity farms and leveling farms, and you can level focus. And all of that good business, and that's all fine. And Rage is occasionally useful as a damage vulnerability, but usually not. And with Pacify and Provoke, you can do a bad imitation of Gloom, but usually, and the thing that I have done on Equinox is I've simply just put Gloom over Pacify and Provoke, because who's using Provoke? And then you just get Gloom with Mend and Maim, which is an occasional map wipe, and that's pretty good. And that also means that you never switch forms, because the form switch is, kind of... It's kind of old in terms of design. You don't really we were not really doing it. I think Equinox overall would actually be a much better frame if she was just one frame that had an actual one ability, or maybe just the ability to have a clone on her one, which we all know is always very good. And then just having rest and then pacify and then maim. And then you could simply, you know, put Gloom over, and then you'd have rest plus maim, which is actually a pretty strong combination for a number of different reasons. But unfortunately, we don't live in that world. And Equinox is a totally playable fine B. It's totally reasonable, but right now, she just doesn't have a lot going for her. She's a Warframe that has just kind of gotten old. And also just, you know, the shifts that are specifically against her were that once enemies have armor, maim is like completely useless because its scaling is based off just HP and shields. And whenever it can't scale off of armor, just totally useless against all those enemies that are armored, which are, of course, the most important enemies in the game. All right, time to talk about Excalibur, one of the starters, the first starter we're going to talk about. In fact, Excalibur is absolutely fine. What a just good Warframe, solid for pretty much all content. Using the Exalted Blade is like a totally reasonable DPS. It's definitely not like absolutely crazy, but few enemies in the game are going to survive this any real amount of time. Once you've built around it and are using like Chromatic Blade, Exalted Blade, very strong DPS ability. It is a little slow. And otherwise, we have Radial Blind for survivability, and of course the constant blocking from Exalted Blade as also more survivability. Generally speaking, these Radial Blind plus Exalted Blade is going to be most of your gameplay with Excalibur. Where enemies are blinded, they take extra damage because they're blinded from your melee, and then you kill them with your melee. Otherwise, Radial Javelin has an augment build where you can get a large melee multiplier, which is okay and fine, but the main functionality of this ability is very far away from being good, as it killing enemies is just not a thing that's going to happen. On the other hand, Slash Dash has been improved quite significantly recently. This ability now dashes between enemies very effectively, and you are invincible while doing it. So, in some cases now, this ability is not only good as, like, you know, a slight traversal ability, but can wipe out a room of guys with, like, one button press, which is more relevant whenever you're kind of like a mid-game player, I would say. But, that being said, he's a starter, so it's very easy to have access to him, and he's a good starter. The general survivability and just using Radial Blind to kill enemies is very solid for his kit as a starter, and the improvements to Slash Dash have made this ability much better for lower level content for anyone looking to play him as their starter. That being said, overall, he's just kind of generally like very middle of the road, what he is, the poster boy of Warframe. He is just very much, hey, look at that. There's the thing. Does what is advertised and really doesn't go much beyond that. He's a B rank Warframe. Totally good. Does a lot of stuff well, but just not super crazy excelling in any particular ways. Okay. Let's talk about Frost, I guess. Frost is a Warframe of all time. One of the very early frames, and he has, unfortunately, not changed a particularly large amount. He does have some things that he can do. Actually, you know what? Let's just get the grade stuff over with right away. He is a D rank Warframe plus. He's a D plus. The reason he has a D plus is because he is patently better than Caliban, but not by much. He is better when fully invested because Avalanche is a much more effective, larger range, both crowd control and armor strip ability, especially with the changes that have recently been made, allowing the armor strip to be just very, very easy and also very, like, well, not very, maybe reasonably wide-reaching, I guess I would say, with the full build. In addition to that, he has the poor survivability of using Snow Globe, which, while good survivability for a defense point, this keeping you stationary and just being a pain in the ass to teammates is not great. And this ability has needed a kind of modernization for quite a long time at this point. Other than that, Ice Wave is basically a non-ability. I only wish it did what it does in the little preview video. It absolutely does not at any relevant level of enemy. And then Freeze, Freeze is, you know, it's cute, right? I guess. And this, similarly to the other single element Warframes, there's an augment where you can have this be a damage increase. But really what you're getting out of Frost is you're getting like a big, wide-reaching armor strip, and then like bad survivability. You can, of course, like throw like Gloom and such onto Frost to try and patch that up and all these different things. But overall, yeah, it's pretty rough out here. Frost is the Warframe I most want a rework for, because I think that not that much needs to change with Frost in order for him to actually be quite good. I have a Warframe rework video for him, which I would encourage you to check out, as I still fully agree with all the changes I would make to him. But yeah, he could be better. A lot better. Let's talk about Gara. Gara is extremely versatile and very useful in the vast majority of content. She has a lot of different things that she can do. Mainly, Splinter Storm is a absolutely stellar ability. This gives her a ton of DR and allows her to survive in pretty much any content. Also, you can put it on any ally. Also, you can put it on like any defense structure or whatever else, any friendly thing that needs you to have defense. Great, amazing. Also, you can put it on any enemy and get damage against them multiplied. And in addition to that, this does damage in an AoE around you, and when used with the other synergies of her kit, between using Shattered Lash and using her 4, this has infinite scaling damage where you can scale it up and then just walk into enemies and they will simply die because they are near you. So Splinter Storm does a lot of different things. Unfortunately, her 1, other than using it as a synergy point with her 4 and then having that build into Splinter Storm or be used as AoE clear with her Mass Vitrify, doesn't really do a ton on its own, which is all right. And then we have Spectral Rage, which, while it has its place as a, subsume on other Warframes, for Gara's purposes, it's not particularly good. That being said, you can, of course, just use this as basically an open helmet slot, giving her a lot of different choices between armor strips and just anything you could want, whether that's like Gloom or anything else. Tons of great options for Gara because she has a good chunk of freedom in how she is built. Finally, Mass Vitrify. This basically is just it's sort of being Frost's bubble, but the majority of times you're going to use this, you're actually going to use this as a DPS ability, because as you can see in the preview, whenever you use your 1 on it, the glass shatters in all directions and deals damage, which is scaled based on your 1 to all of the enemies outside of the ring. So, for low-level farming, you can just create the ring and blow it up and kill everyone on the map and rinse and repeat that process. That is, of course, very strong at low levels and a great way to clear low-level maps. At higher levels, just putting this around defense objectives is not impenetrable, but very strong and is going to keep most enemies out, even in the steel path. Generally, just a very strong Warframe all the way around. I will say, the things that she does that are unique don't have an insane amount of use cases. Like, the infinite scaling damage is cool, but not better than a lot of your other options that are non-infinite scaling. And in addition to that, the defensive capabilities of Mass Vitrify are usually kind of crept out by just putting Splinter Storm on whatever you're defending. So overall, she's good, and she's very hard to kill, and she's very generally useful, but I think she's just a bit below a lot of the other Warframes in A rank. She's an A-, very solid Warframe. Great, especially early, a really good pickup that you can just get from the Plains of Eidolon. Super solid Warframe overall. Okay, time to talk about Garuda. Not gonna slow roll you on this one. She's B rank Warframe. Totally good, absolutely reasonable. She has some unique things that she can do. She can use Seeking Talons, make it so all enemies take a slash from every single instance of damage that they receive, which is very good. This has an infinite damage loop that you can do if you subsume Wisp's ability onto her. Generally, I don't much like that anymore, as this plus literally whatever is usually enough to kill anything you happen to be fighting, and I generally prefer to go with Gloom. She has an amazing energy economy with Bloodletting, just giving her basically just free infinite energy at the cost of some health. She has Blood Altar, which is her normal heal. I just prefer to use Gloom instead, because this is a bit limiting in terms of you having to stay in its area as opposed to the area moving with you. And then she has her Dread Mirror. Her Dread Mirror, I wish every day that this was just damage reduction that she applies to herself while she has a blood ball. But it is a directional shield, even though you jump into the middle of a crowd of enemies to acquire it, which is really counterintuitive. That being said, she has a bunch of cool stuff that she does. A lot of the cool stuff that she does doesn't work on a lot of things. So, like Kuva Liches, any enemy that has a limited amount of status procs that they can take, she really isn't doing kind of anything against. There's lots of just general limitations here. Like her one is just worse Volt Shield and so on and so forth. Like it's like a good unique thing to be doing, but there's not a lot of places in the game where doing that good unique thing actually works or really has a great payoff, and you end up being kind of squishy for it. But general content-wise, she really doesn't have much trouble doing anything outside of the places where, like, her 4 just doesn't function, which is, you know, she's decent. You know, she's right. She's here. She's doing all right. We get to talk about Gauss. Gauss is an absolutely excellent Warframe. Also, not going to slow roll you on this one. He is an A- Warframe, and a lot of people are going to be very mad that he has a minus, but hear me out. So, Gauss is very good. Gauss has his meter, and then he builds Redline for a gigantic buff that is based off duration, allowing you to be in this gigantic buff for a very, very long amount of time and have it be very, very strong. Alongside that, he has kinetic plating, which makes him immune to most types of damage. You are very seldomly going to encounter anything that's actually going to bypass this outside of toxin procs, and you are basically going to be invincible. This also notably goes up from that 70% reduction to 100% reduction while you are in the thing that you want to be maintaining all the time, which is Redline. And in addition to that, you get to use Mock Rush. This, of course, makes it so that Gauss is very, very fast. And you get Thermal Sunder. So, if you wanted to, Gauss is excellent at low-level enemy clear. You can just build him entirely for Thermal Sunder and wipe out maps with him. There are other frames you can give this to that do that much better, but Gauss inherently has that ability, though I would say usually the Thermal Sunder slot for him is not going to be used by him, and you'll instead subsume whatever else you want. He can build for anything that wants duration, and then your build can be adjusted to pretty much fit whatever you want besides that, and most of the helmets, honestly, benefit from duration. So, lots to be done here with Gauss. The downside, and the reason he has the minus, is because, generally speaking, maintaining his meter in any of the game modes that are like stand still and defend this, which turns out is way more of them than you'd expect, is kind of a pain in the ass. It's not that he has a hard time. It's just that it's just not, like, the gameplay loop that he wants to do is not conducive to stand right here and defend this thing, because your Mock Rush is going to be you dashing away from that thing all the time. So, a little bit of a downside there. Generally speaking, it's not a huge deal, but I do think that, like, his gameplay loop not really working with those game modes is enough to give him a little bit of a minus. And I also think that his buff is not as relevant as other ones that we do have access to. And it is specifically very bad against attenuation, because this buff is not just damage, it is fire rate. All of the things that have attenuation take fire rate hilariously into account and reduce your damage like as much as possible when you have a lot of fire rate, which makes him bad against every single enemy that has attenuation. Well, not necessarily bad, but not as good as a lot of other choices, like the Kuvaliches, the Sisters of Parvos. The Kuvaliches is not a big deal. More so the Sisters of Parvos. And then, of course, you have, like, Necromech hunting and, like, taking down the Archons and all that business. Fire rate buffs work horribly against all of them. So, also a bit of a downside, usually pretty negligible, and Gauss is very good at the vast majority of content, and even in the places where I would say he is, like, struggling a little bit, it's really not too big of a deal, because most of the time you're invincible anyway because of kinetic plating. And yeah, he's just great. Love Gauss. Grendel. Grendel has had the most recent insane high-quality glow-up in that Grendel might as well be absolutely brand new as of this review. Grendel is stellar, and I would put him at a very easy A. Not an A+, because I do think that there are a few different cases where he has, like, just a few downsides and, like, can't clear as well as certain other frames and things like that. But generally speaking, what you're getting with Grendel is you're getting a completely impossible to kill Warframe because he has super low shields, which really pairs well with just constantly slapping shield gates back on with any of, like, the Augur mods or Brief Respite or whatever else, which makes you it's very easy for you to take any hit as long as you are, like, constantly refreshing that shield, which most of the time you are. And in addition to that, he has a huge amount of armor and health, which usually bolstered up with adaptation means that he is this gigantic bag of health that cannot die, even if he's not playing with his powers, which are all good now. So baseline, you can just walk into nullifier bubbles and not give a shit and just be on the map and be like, I'm a big fat guy and I'm going to kill you. And that's the baseline goodness of another Warframe we'll get to later that doesn't have anything else going. With Grendel, Feast, you eat enemies, and the big problem with Feast is that the enemies die too fast in your stomach. So that's not great, I guess, because you want to maintain 5 enemies in your stomach at all times for your other abilities. So the fact that this does so much damage ends up being a downside, especially in lower level content, where it's hard to even keep 1 enemy in your stomach. So upside to downside. And then for his second ability, Nourish, which is an amazing helmet, by the way, this gives you 3... Actually, wait, is it 3? I think it's 4. Oh, no, it's 3 buffs in the heal. Right. So this gives you a bunch of different buffs. You get a viral procking retaliation thing, which is whenever any enemies hit you, you just do a burst of viral. You generate way more energy, and you also get a ton of additional damage, which affects a lot of abilities, and more specifically, it affects all of his abilities in order to do way more damage, and it heals you. Notably on the helmet, it does not heal you because you do have to have enemies in your stomach in order to get the heal, but the heal basically is going to heal you to full from whatever else. This buff lasts a long time, and it's very, very good, especially for your just general sustain. This is a frame that really can go real light on the efficiency and not even feel it at all because you generate so much energy, and it is really, really nice. Also, this being a viral damage increase is very good because elemental damage increases are better than they've ever been because it's very easy for us to get those Serration multipliers, but elemental stuff we can be a little light on and go heavier into other things. And viral is, of course, probably the best combined elemental in the game, which is great. Moving on to his other core stuff, we have Pulverize. Pulverize is you turn into a ball, and every time you hit a surface, you get to deal damage to all of the enemies that are within your area of effect. That area of effect and that amount of damage gets better the more enemies that are in your stomach. At low levels, as I've said, that can be kind of a problem to keep enemies in your stomach, but with the augment for Pulverize, Grendel becomes one of the fastest Warframes in the game. Being in Pulverize and using that augment allow you to burst around the map extremely fast. You can keep up or be faster than Wukong's. He's faster than Gauss unless he's trying to go uphill. And he is just able to just blitz around and just obliterate through maps. Just absolutely pile through and go super, super fast. Great for, like, captures in any fast content, exterminates, so on and so forth. And whenever you're combining Feast plus his 4th ability, which is Regurgitate, this gives him map clear. Now, you have to build a lot of range for this, but it's very worthwhile because you're also getting a 100% armor reduction with a very, very low amount of strength. Oh, also, by the way, his 3, just when you're bouncing around, also is in armor reduction. So that's also quite good, given enough strength added. But Regurgitate, you just dunk into a crowd of enemies, eat one guy, dunk an enemy into a crowd. It puts toxin procs on all of them and deals a good chunk of damage that scales. And it's removing all the armor. It's a good armor strip that also will usually just kill the group that you fire it into. Absolutely fantastic. I have found that this is not very good on Eximus. It tends to be a bit of an underperformer on Eximus. But with the general tankiness that Grendel has, Eximus can't really kill him anyway. But so you're going to have to use weapons to, like, at least get rid of the Overguard on Eximus, and then his 4 performs very well against them. But he's a little bit of an underperformer when it comes to Eximus, and Eximus are quite common, which is why I would dock him the plus, essentially. But overall, he is, like, extremely good, super survivable. The worst thing about Grendel is doing the missions to acquire him. Extremely happy with how he turned out. If you have not seen the way this frame plays, I would really suggest you go watch my builds video for him because he is great and super fun. Gyre. Gyre is really cool, and unfortunately, she is a C rank Warframe. This frame, on launch, was very hard to evaluate because she was extremely inconsistent. And I was like, this frame is either really good or really bad, based on if this is a bug to be bad or if it is a bug to be good. The unfortunate thing is that it was a bug to be good, and that means that Gyre is actually, and was always supposed to be, not good. So what does Gyre have? Gyre has her 1, where she launches out basically this orb that constantly procs electricity damage and like just stays out in the AoE. She has her Coil Horizon, which is basically her just grouping ability that groups enemies up and also gives you electric and everything like that. You have Cathode Grace, which this is how her energy regen goes, and she also gets a critical chance, which is very good. And also this is very easy to keep up because you get more duration every time you kill enemies, which is of course what you want to be doing. And then her 4, Rotor Swell, which is supposed to tie everything together, and it did when it was bugged, and it no longer does. So you would turn this on, and basically this would tick, and every time you would put electricity on enemies, it would give you an extra instance of damage. Because you had constant fields with the Arc Sphere going all the time, this would basically tick, 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 and just kill any enemies that are constantly taking electric procs. But that now has a super insanely long internal cooldown, and this does like basically no damage whenever it only does it like once every second. It was ticking like 30, 40 times or whatever, and it was extremely effective at taking down large groups of enemies, and it was great. Understandably, that crashed people's games, but they fixed that part by like making it so it had like the long internal cooldown, didn't hit as many enemies or whatever. But this ability doesn't like keystone her whole self and make a good Warframe without more damage and like more to do and like making this the thing that synergizes with everything else that makes you kill the enemies. And because it doesn't do that, it means that you've got an okay grouping ability and like kind of, you know, electric proc crowd control, and you get some critical chance. And then otherwise, it's a pretty lackluster Warframe that is like, you know, visually very cool, I would say, but overall doesn't have really much going for them. You can do content, and she's great at low-level content for sure. But whenever you take her into anything that has enemies of any real substance, it becomes very clear that her abilities aren't doing much. And she's kind of just there dancing about and looking cool, and that's, you know, fine. There's a lot of really good design here, and it is really just a numbers change away from Gyre being very good. But with her heavily restricted 4 not being allowed to make the rest of her kit work and be good, there's really not much to do here. Harrow, the priest himself. So, Harrow has quite a bit going for him. He is a solid support, but in the support category, he more so wants to do absolutely everything himself, and he has a good variety of ways to get things done. With that said, those ways, none of them really reach the heights kind of necessary to break into the A category. So he's at B+. But just to go over those great things that he has, Condemn is excellent shield generation and crowd control. There's actually a number of Warframes that take this as their subsume from him because it is excellent survivability for them, and also is great CC that generally works very well. And it works very well for Harrow because this will set enemies up for headshots, which he very much wants and is very much incentivized in his entire kit. Penance, this gives you lifesteal, which is kind of whatever. Mostly you're going to be healing teammates, as he will very seldomly take any health damage. But you're also going to be getting a lot of fire rate and reload speed, which can be extremely helpful depending on your weapon choices, and that's quite good. Durable, which is very notable, this is his energy generation. Basically, whenever you kill any enemies, you're going to generate energy, and if you kill them with a headshot, you're going to generate way more energy. This is the thing that makes him one of the best Thermal Sunder users in the game, because Thermal Sunder kills trigger Thurable. So, if you throw Thermal Sunder over, let's say, Penance, and you build around that, you activate Thurible, and then in any low to mid to kind of high, honestly, not Steel Path really viable, but Thermal Sunder will basically cost like 30 energy and then give you like 400 energy because it will kill entire quadrants of a map very, very easily. And you can pump as much strength as you want into it because you have Thurible to just give you all of the energy back, which is super, super solid and a great DPS build that I would suggest for Harrow. In addition, he has Covenant. Covenant makes you invincible for a time and then gives you a bunch of crit. And also, of course, the headshot multiplier and so on and so forth. This is a super solid ability that the invincibility on the front is sometimes used in Eidolons. Some people like that for that, but usually it's like a panic button. That's fine. But the big thing is using this with its augment to keep that damage buff kind of permanently and do hilarious amounts of damage while crowd controlling with your one and just being able to burst down whatever you want, essentially, with a ton of criticals. So, overall, he's got a lot to do. Unfortunately, I think that he's just, a bit slow, and these strategies have some, like, clunkiness to them with, like, going through, like, the retaliation phase and actually getting the full buff of it and so on and so forth. And also, Durable plus, like, Thermal Sunder and such, all of that stuff is really good, but there are better users for it, and he tends to be kind of slow with it, even though it is very effective. It is especially effective and notable in Elite Sanctuary Onslaught, because you get to build kind of like the strongest version of Thermal Sunder available because you just don't have to care about the energy economy at all. But yeah, that's Harrow. Hildryn. So this is a frame that I really did not like at first, and they did not have much going for them. However, things have changed since then, and currently, Hildryn has a very unique way to be built that is extremely strong and somewhat accessible with the new tools that we have. Namely, we are using Pillage, which is her armor stripping ability. At max rank, this is 25% of strip of shields and armor. So, at 400% strength, it is a 100% strip of all enemy defenses. In addition to that, this has an augment where enemies affected by Haven will take heat procs from Pillage whenever they get pillaged. What this means is if you do a Pillage Haven build with 400% strength, using, the new Archon shards that we have access to, using Molt Augmented and all this other stuff that has made the strength way easier to get, and like you can make an actual build with that still has range and duration, which you also need for Pillage. You can take all those things together and pair it with the Subsume from Chroma under electric damage, and what you end up with is a situation where because Hildryn is unique in that her energy economy, she spends shields, she does not have energy. Whenever you spend shields to cast an ability, namely Pillage is what you're going to be casting all the time, number one, Pillage gives you all those shields back and then a lot. And number two, that spending counts as retaliative damage or electric ward. So you take Chroma's electric ward, and then whenever you spend like 400 shields, that gets multiplied by like 50 and gets sent out as damage to the newly no defenses enemies around you, on top of the heat proc and damage that they all take. So you end up in a feedback loop situation where you have infinite shields, enemies do not have armor, enemies do not have shields, they're on fire, and they're taking tens of thousands of damage by being near you. And that's all really good. Notably, her 4 is terrible. Aegis Storm, completely useless, absolutely horrible. And Balefire is generally what you're going to, Balefire or Aegis Storm are what you're going to just throw Electric Ward over. Balefire is okay-ish. It's like fine, but you're better off just using regular weaponry, as Balefire doesn't scale particularly well. It's totally fine for most content, and you can use it. There's just a lot more on offer just in your regular arsenal, as opposed to trying to build around this, or use it and spend your shields. So yeah, generally speaking, you don't use Balefire, you don't use Aegis Storm, but the combination of Pillage, Haven, plus the Augment, plus Subsuming, is very, very strong and allows you to be just completely invincible, walking around, just removing enemy shields and watching them burn to death. Extremely, extremely good A rank. Easy mode, A rank. I think that she is super, super good for that. The only thing is that it's very strong, but a bit slow. In that, in a lot of missions, you are going to kill enemies a little bit too slowly with that, because it's super safe and it's strong and it will always get the job done. But you really do still want to be pairing it with weapons, because it's not going to just like instant clear waves like a lot of other DPS frames will do, but it is one of the safest ways to do it. Mostly the dock from not getting the plus is really just speed and efficiency. So this is the one where I think it's probably most arguable whether she gets the plus or not, if I'm being entirely honest. Okay, we have to talk about Hydroid. You guys probably saw this coming, but Hydroid is the worst frame in the game. He is an F rank Warframe. This is the first F rank I am giving out, and that is because Hydroid, put very simply, does not work. Like, you can play as Hydroid, but it is my position that you should not. Hydroid has a very ineffectual one that you can use an augment with to get a very slow, bad armor strip. Tidal Surge, which is a mediocre movement ability that gets caught on everything and is otherwise pretty useless. Undertow has never done the thing it's supposed to do. It is a constantly bugged, slow, bad DPS, like a horrible state to be in, where you just become a puddle and then don't play Warframe and you don't do anything effective. And then Tentacle Swarm. This has an augment that would theoretically give you more loot, but generally speaking, this makes no sense to use over your alternatives, and this doesn't do any damage. It is not effective even really at low levels. It's slow, and the whole thing is bad. The whole thing is bad. I wish Hydroid was good, but whenever I'm looking at a frame and I'm going, I don't know why I would use any of this outside of maybe, I guess, because I have to, the Tempest Barrage augment, and then just slap Gloom over who cares what ability, and I guess the Warframe's playable, that is a horrible, horrible, awful state to be in. This frame, conceptually, and from what their abilities are right now, should be, like, turning into a, basically just, like, you know, a creeping death. Like, turning into the puddle, getting enemies in it, eliminating them, moving through the map, like, with the Tidal Surge, which is extremely, extremely insanely clunky right now. Keeping enemies in the Undertow as they die, like, doing all of that stuff. Like, Tentacle Swarm should, like, be doing something that's relevant at all. Because, like, you know, having, like, a Kraken to, like, kill enemies, like, that's, you know, the idea is good. The ideas are here. And they are executed not even at all, hardly. It's real rough out here. I would not suggest anyone play Hydroid. It is truly terrible and awful. Do not bother. Thankfully, we've washed ashore and are now on the beach. Let's talk about Inaros. Inaros has long time been extremely popular, mainly for the fact that he is a big bag o' health, and you cannot kill Inaros. That long-term, like from his inception, that was kind of the thing where you're Inaros, you cannot die, enemies cannot affect you, don't care if you're nullified, don't care if they turn off your abilities, I am health, goodbye, good day, sir, goodbye. That has been the thing that Inaros has been. Unfortunately, that is just not good enough anymore, and worth noting, we have some inklings that Inaros may be receiving a rework, and I think there's a lot of potential for him to be much, much better. But right now, he doesn't have that. So, where Inaros is unfortunately B-. He still has all of the survivability and the capability to build around whatever helmet he wants, and so on and so forth. There's lots of flexibility there. And you have the baseline stuff of Desiccation being like solid crowd control that's going to stop enemies and all this stuff, but losing his ability to instant kill enemies because Covert Lethality got nerfed, and not having anything except for just building up your Scarab Swarm to be immune to your knockdowns and other statuses and so on and so forth, which Prime Sure-Footed does for a lot of other frames at this point. And then Devour being nothing but a thing that can do some Riven challenges in a weird way, and Sandstorm being pretty much entirely ineffectual. Whenever you take all these things together, he's kind of a Warframe that really is just a big bag of health that you can shoot a gun from, and the rest of his abilities kind of just aren't there at this point. you're just subsuming on whatever you like or want, which is usually an armor strip, and then just shooting a man's, which, whenever things were, a lot of nullifiers and we couldn't use abilities and D was doing all this stuff that was kind of designed around like not getting to play Warframe traditionally, just walking in and being health was really good. But right now, where we currently are, you got to have some abilities and also be invincible to really be truly great. Hopefully, he gets that rework that we've gotten some inklings of and becomes much, much better. But for now, he's just, in a much worse state than he's been. But being totally invincible and not caring about any mechanics the game throws at you is pretty good, unless you're in late Steel Path where he'll still die because he doesn't have shields. Ivara. So, Ivara has a number of things going for her. She has the constant invisibility. She makes spy vaults very easy. Her 4 is quite solid and is one of, honestly, probably the better exalted weapons and can kill enemies very effectively. Her 2 has some niche use cases where it sees use. People use this for eidolons and such like that. While not being the most efficient type thing, it is pretty good. And then her quiver, having the capability to group enemies and do stealth stuff with her noise arrows is interesting. Having the sleep so you can have like large amounts of crowd control is nice. Her other 2 arrows really don't see much use. Her dash wires and her cloak arrows. Her cloak arrows, occasionally people will build around them and they're fine. But in general, what you're getting here is a really good stealth Warframe that is just kind of slow. Namely because Prowl, of course, gives you like the huge debuff of having to walk and not being able to sprint or do any parkour. And with that, you can, of course, bolster your parkour speed and do rolls, which are allowed during Prowl, which help her quite a bit. And because she has all of these, she has an easy mode, basically, for a lot of different content. And she's excellent for solo players and can get you through a lot of different things very, very easily. And her build restrictions are very, very low. And all that stuff is great. She's a great Warframe to have in your arsenal, and you're probably going to want her for certain things until you get into, like, the Warframes that do all of that stuff better. And because of all of the Warframes that can kind of just, like, take the concepts and stuff that Ivara does well and then just pretty much strictly do all of that better because she just has a number of downsides that are affecting her, she ends up, I think personally, at a solid B+. Part of that plus, a large part of that plus, is that I personally think that Ivara is just the tops for doing rep farming in the open worlds, except for Deimos, and that is pretty considerable. Whenever you are, like going to be the go-to pick for like hunting the animals and getting like the rep and like doing all of that business and getting all that stuff done super fast, she is going to be a quicker option for those things, and that's a lot of where her plus comes from. Otherwise, she would probably be at just B, but her general performance is good overall, just not like insanely stellar in any particular category. Okay, we did it. We passed the threshold. We went 20 Warframes without giving one out. This is Khora. Khora's an A+ Warframe. Khora is excellent. She is the premier farming Warframe in the game for all resources that come from enemies that can be affected by her 4. And she is an extremely powerful frame for most of like the long-term farms, such as Disruption, which she is amazing at. She has really high-end crowd control and super high damage from her 1, which also affects a large area. Her 2 is great, extremely useful CC against Disruption targets, gives her a damage boost, groups enemies, all that good business. Her 3 is Venari, which is a completely free and open helmet slot, because whenever you helmet over this, you don't lose Venari. You just get to keep her. So she gets a totally free helmet slot to just build into whatever she wants, which is great. And Strangle Dome is solid CC. You can put multiple of these down, and this increases the AoE of your 1 because all enemies trapped within this will take damage from your 1. So she ends up being a setup Warframe that puts down Strangle Domes, and in any content where you're farming, you get to use her 4 augment and just get double or not triple, but you get double loot drops basically all of the time, as the chance is quite good. And this allows you to farm whatever you happen to be farming extremely fast. And if you don't need to be getting like the drops from enemies, you just have that free slot where her build works anyway. You can just build into pretty much whatever you want. And as long as you're at 200% range, her Whip Claw is able to kill enemies at pretty much any level of play, as long as you have a decently built stat stick for her. Absolutely excellent Warframe, a staple, great stuff. Very happy that she has a Prime now, as her Prime is way easier to farm than the regular version. And I would highly advise anyone put Khora into your arsenal. She is just excellent. Okay, now we get to talk about Lavos. Lavos is conceptually extremely interesting. He is a Warframe that runs on cooldowns instead of energy, and also has a system where you get to combine different holds of different abilities to put any elemental or elemental combination of things into any of your given abilities. That all being said, number one, he is a C rank Warframe. Number two, he is slow. Just slow. There are more things than at launch for him, in that you can use the Ophidian Bite Augment plus his 3 to try and temper those cooldowns and like get them lower, and so you can cast your 4 a whole lot more, which would be your way to deal a lot of damage. But there's no really good way to do that. You can absolutely force Lavos to work, but just the way his kit is put together and like the long cooldowns and stuff he has to manage, and just like the numbers that his abilities output, you have to put so much investment and setup into what ultimately amounts to things that other frames just do better and easier. And on top of that, it's worth noting that he is pretty survivable, so you do have time to do these things as long as you build into like adaptation and a good chunk of health and armor, which is going to be pretty easy because he doesn't have to worry about an energy economy. But the abilities that he outputs, while super cool and the design is very interesting, are just not particularly effective and are much too restricted. And actually, to be fair, the restrictive nature of his abilities is most of the reason why they are not effective. Because if you could actually like pretty much easily refund all your cooldowns, Vile Rush would make him like fast. Ophidian Bite probably also would need a large damage buff because it's not particularly good. And also the clunky nature of like just putting elements together probably would need to be looked at, so you can like kind of keep an element longer term and spam it on like a bunch of different abilities. Just kind of the design here is gummed up and makes him slow, unfortunately. I do think there's a world where a lot of things change very much just numbers wise and like minor functionality wise on Lavos, and he suddenly becomes very good. There's absolutely a world where that happens, I think. But right now, it's all just like very clunky and not super worth going to the end of. Similarly, we have Limbo. A lot of people like Limbo, and you're welcome to like Limbo. However, Limbo is a C- Warframe. Limbo does not have very much going for him right now. You can, in low levels and stuff, you can give him like, a DPS ability, such as like Thermal Sunder or whatever else, and then use his passive to dash into the rift and generate energy and not be able to be hit by the enemies that are still affected by Thermal Sunder. But by and large, that's like okay at low levels and doesn't really work at all at high levels. And in high levels, you don't really have any survivability, and like using your Cataclysm and Rift Surge and stasising enemies, there's just Xmas that are not affected by this at all and do not care and will just kill you. You can even be killed while you're in the rift and they're outside of the rift. And honestly, the Xmas trying to kill you at high levels are just using like a better version of Thermal Sunder that's like directed at you, and it will kill you very, very easily. So like, you can do Limbo stuff and like you do Rift Surge and have Cataclysm and Stasis and all this stuff, and then like basically fight the Xmas in a very mediocre way. But it works. It's like it is a play style, but it is rough. It has got a lot of rough holes in it that make things real tough. And generally speaking, what Limbo's actually good at is like Grenier missions where you can just like slap Cataclysm down on a defense point and make it really easy to just make the enemies not able to take the defense point, and like, just do mobile defenses and stuff like that very easily, which there are a ton of Warframes that can do all that stuff very, very easily, and he doesn't particularly excel at that. Very much a unique frame that kind of has constantly just had the game specifically designed against them for a while here. Way back, there was kind of nothing enemies could do to Limbo, but more and more, it's becoming that like enemies are just kind of given a hall pass into the rift to kill him, which is a bit unfortunate. let's talk about Loki. I'm not going to make any friends here. Loki is a C rank Warframe. Now, let's talk about the things that Loki has. You can go invisible and it lasts a long time. Okay, that is the end of the list. I'm kidding. A little. I'm mostly not kidding. You can switch teleport the drones you have to escort in the plains of Eidolon. Okay, now I think I'm at the end of the list. Radial disarm, years ago, used to be like a crowd control thing that we would do, and that was effective because, you know, enemies just didn't get guns anymore. Now that's just not effective enough, and really, it doesn't affect a ton of things, and so on and so forth. Decoy, I don't know why this thing still has health. It just dies instantly. There's really no reason it should have health. And then, you know, you're invisible, and switch teleport is totally useless in the vast majority of content. But you're invisible, and being invisible, yeah. I mean, I think it's better now to just, you know, have boundless amounts of health, and just to be, you know, able to kill enemies that way. And it usually benefits you because enemies will come to you to be killed. And invisibility just entirely on its lonesome is fine, but, you know, all of the other invisibility Warframes also do other stuff rather than just that. Let's talk about Mag, our second starter. So, very similarly to Excal, she is a B rank Warframe. And I know there's a lot of people that really like Mag, and I think that she's solid right now. But she still has quite a bit of clunk to go around, because you are using Magnetize generally at higher levels to just like blow up rooms and kill enemies and do all this stuff very quickly, and that absolutely works. Using Polarize, either with its augment or not, as survivability, using Crush with its survivability add, and at low levels being able to clear enemies with Crush relatively easily. Pull, much better now, great grouping ability, but Mag generally really doesn't want to be in melee range. However, you can use this to pull enemies into your Magnetizes to be killed, and that's quite good. And you can use weapon synergies with Magnetize to have enemies die very, very quickly. All that stuff is good, but generally, it is a whole lot of investment and setup and kind of particular map things that you need to have going on for her to really reach what she wants to be at. And in a lot of cases, when those things don't line up, Mag just pretty significantly underperforms. You can absolutely like force her playstyle into work, and there's actually a lot of places where it does do good work. But I think there's enough areas where it's just a bit too clunky or a bit like, you know, no time to set up or not fast enough that she ends up being like just good, just overall just generally good. And I do think that if you're starting out, Mag, in my evaluation, is probably the best frame to be starting as right now, although they're all pretty close at this point. But yeah, good frame, just not going crazy above and beyond here. All right, let's talk Mesa. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. A+. This should not come as a surprise to literally anyone. Mesa has a ton going for her, and she has even more going for her post Archon Shards, because Archon Shards added like the one thing she doesn't get normally, and she gets to utilize it extremely well. We'll go into that in a moment, but let's start off. Ballistic Battery, they tried to fix this year. It didn't work, but I'm glad they tried. I appreciate it. This is still a bad ability that you will helmet over. However, she probably would want to do that even if this ability was good, so, you know, no harm, no foul. Her Shooting Gallery, this is close range crowd control and a damage boost for her, which is good, and also your allies get it. One at a time, of course. And Shatter Shield. Shatter Shield with a very small amount of strength is a huge amount of damage reduction, and while that does not affect everything, because AoEs and melee will still hit you, melee you are generally insulated from because of Shooting Gallery, and AoEs are not super common and can usually be avoided. And then we have Peacemaker. Peacemaker is the big thing, the big deal on Mesa. Usually this is used alongside its augment so you can move during it. This is an incredibly high power ability that can clear large amounts of enemies extremely quickly at all levels of play. Usually, she gets an armor strip subsumed onto her. Personally, I prefer Pillage. There are a number of different options. I've heard people like Nourish on her recently. But generally speaking, you are just an absolute house of damage. Can't die. Buffing allies a little bit, buffing yourself. and armor stripping and shield stripping if you have subsumed pillage. All that comes together to make her an insanely good disruption Warframe. Whenever you give her Archon shards, she can use a lot of different configurations. Personally, right now, I am on 3 parkour speed because if you pair her augment with the 3 parkour speed and amalgam barrel diffusion, which is a weird build, but you get that amalgam barrel diffusion, you get to go super, super fast. She can be in her 4 and be rolling through the map, keeping up with a Wukong while shooting her peacemakers, which is pretty nutty. And even when you're not doing that, lower levels of play of Mesa are similarly extremely powerful. You do not have to be this insane investment thing to get a ton out of her. Even if you're not using her for augment, you can use her with a jump style where you just jump into the air and then get in your 4, and that'll allow you to keep movement and like hit a lot more enemies whenever you do that, which is a very effective way to play her. But even if you play her poorly and just sit in place and shoot enemies, that's still pretty effective. Mesa is just absolutely excellent. Small disclaimer, she is my second favorite Warframe. Mirage. Now, before I tell you what rank she is, I do want to point out that there are a number of pieces of content that use Mirage in very specific ways with her Eclipse buff to get huge amounts of damage and do things extremely fast, and be able to like buff squads with her Eclipse augment and all this stuff. And you can do all these really specific like tight-knit group things and get tons of damage and all that stuff. And most of those setups are like pretty unsafe, and no like normal people are really going to be using that because it's so inconvenient to use and her abilities are very inconsistent. That inconsistency in terms of her sometimes being absolutely amazing, excellent, and then sometimes being like really not what you want right now, brings her down to kind of the middle of the road at B. Very often, you are just not going to be in the right light setting for Eclipse, which is annoying and just a huge pain. So both of these buffs, whether it's damage reduction or the damage increase, are super good. But because you don't really get to pick or have much control over it, it ends up being pretty lackluster. Sleight of Hand has a good build that you can use, specifically usually in ESO, but really a lot of low-level stuff where if you set up with a bunch of dead enemies, you can turn all of the drops on the floor into bombs and kill all the enemies in the map over and over and over, because those enemies you kill drop stuff and so on and so forth. That is relatively effective. I think that build is all right, but I think there's a lot of better options than it for those types of situations, but she does have access to it and it does work. In addition to that, Hall of Mirrors is a damage upgrade. You get to fire 3 guns at once or swing 5 melee weapons at once, which is a reasonable, increase of damage that is relatively effective. Never as effective as the Eclipse buff, but Hall of Mirrors, solid. Gives you kind of a little bit of survivability, which is a thing that Mirage generally will lack. And then Prism. This used to be the ability that would make Mirage an S-rank Warframe. This got heavily nerfed to not be line of sight and is now like a hilariously slow cast ability that doesn't do anything. So whatever you're subsuming onto Mirage, it's going to be over this ability because it is effectively not even really an ability anymore. So yeah, overall, like she has some definitely specific instances where she's going to be really excellent or can be like taken advantage of in specific ways. But those are pretty irrelevant to most people, and I think generally speaking, she meters out to about a B. Nekros. So, this Warframe is probably the one that I have received the most pre-guff for. For those that don't know, for all of the patrons and Twitch subs and everybody, I release my grades early, and this is the one that most people disagree with, but I think that it is important to discuss the reason why the grade is this way. So Nekros, on my scale, currently is an A-. And it's important to note that he is not like other A-rank frames. The reason that Nekros is at A-rank is because of Desecrate. Plain and simple, Desecrate does the thing that Warframe wants from us, which is, well, that we want from Warframe, I suppose. Maybe not the Warframe wants from us. And that is give us more loot. This does not have any other equivalent loot abilities that can compete with this, because the only other thing is one of the dogs that no one uses. So you can combine this with Khora or any of the other looting abilities that are the other varieties and get double loot, get more survival, air, so on and so forth. Just get more stuff. And that is the big reason why Nekros is in A, because that ability is so good and it is so important to so many farms that even if you don't do anything else, other people will simply babysit you in the mission because that ability is so relevant and so good for what we're doing most of the time, which is farming. Otherwise, there are things that Nekros has access to that he can do. Terrify, Armor Strip. Armor Strip is good. Terrify, I think, is one of the worst armor strips in the game because this has an enemy effect limitation. And also, in addition to that, it makes enemies run away, which, generally speaking, that just sucks. You don't want enemies to run away from you. You want them to run towards you and then die, especially if you just stripped their armor. Obviously, this is very thematic for him, but that doesn't matter for this. And Terrify, generally speaking, I find to be very annoying. But it is an armor strip. And then you have Shadows of the Dead. So Shadows of the Dead gives you a bunch of AI characters that are totally worthless combat-wise. Absolutely awful terrible. But with the augment, they can give you a ton of damage reduction, and that can help you survive while you are giving your team more loot. So that will make you tanky enough, and then you get double loot, basically, is the TLDR for what Nekros does. Really, the whole thing here is that he is so highly rated because in terms of like his relevance and how much he's needed around, it is fairly constant for any of the resource farms that he is going to be brought to it if he works. And he works on the vast majority of them. So yeah, that's what's up with Nekros. It is worth noting, without Desecrate, I probably immediately dunk Nekros all the way down into C rank. So please take into account that this Warframe's pretty rough without that exact part. Let's talk about a frame that's not rough at all. This is Nezha Prime, and Nezha Prime is a very, very simple A+ from me. Not a problem, easy to do. There are a lot of advantages to being Nezha. In the past, Nezha was always called like fast worst Rhino. That was Nezha's reputation early on. Now, Nezha has fully succeeded Rhino in being very simply better, faster, better Rhino. And that is extremely, extremely powerful. Warding Halo pretty much just makes you invincible, and you can also, with its augment, put it on allies, which is very much appreciated. And anytime this would break, it makes you invincible, and you just get to cast it again while you're invincible. So, at all times, you're going to have 90% damage reduction. You do still have to build some other stats because, of course, enemies will deal 10% of their damage to you. Things like adaptation and such can make it so they're dealing like 1% damage to you, which is like nothing, and you're totally fine all the time. But it is worth noting, it is not just invincibility. And then you have Divine Spears, which can be used as a low-level DPS ability, which you usually won't use it for, and then it can also be crowd control if you want to keep this ability. Me, personally, I get rid of Divine Spears because I run Narrow-Minded, and then I replace this ability with Roar, which is Rhino's ability. Roar is a % damage buff that is its own damage increase, and it's a Bane increase. So it's a giant damage increase that you can get on Nezha very easily and works really well with the rest of the stuff that he wants to build if you get rid of Divine Spears. And Blazing Chakram is a multiplicative bonus with that. This is a 60% damage vulnerability, which is a lot, and that's affected by strength. So when you combine Roar plus Blazing Chakram, what you get is an absolutely absurd multiplicative double dip on all of your damage on the enemy that you've hit with Blazing Chakram if you're using Roar. Meaning you basically get the strongest Roar available, and it's the powered down version that you got from Rhino. In addition to that, we have Firewalker, which increases your speed, and also, just is going to make it so you're not affected by statuses and such, and that's all very, very good. But more so than all of that, he gets all of those things and his passive, which whenever you apply Maglev additionally to this, you will go extremely fast with sliding. So you can slide on through the map very, very quickly. Some people don't like it, but it is an extremely fast method of travel that is highly good. And you're just invincible, insane amounts of damage, like fire everywhere, just dumb amounts of damage and everything. And you can, you know, if you decide not to go the Roar route, you still get Divine Spears for crowd control and like taking down maps and things that way, and also the safety of it. And it's just good to be Nezha. Being able to do missions fast and super safe turns out is quite good. All right, let's talk about Nidus. Nidus is an extremely, extremely cool Warframe that has a lot of interesting things going on. He builds meter with his Virulence and his Larva and his Ravenous after he gets it down. And then that meter both keeps him alive and adds a bunch of damage. And also, you use that meter to cast like Parasitic Link and Ravenous and all this good business. And he's super, super interesting. Unfortunately, he also, I would say, is a B rank Warframe because those things that he does, while really cool and super interesting, all end up being just generally kind of slow. He builds up very slowly, so he's not really good at short missions. And whenever he's built up all the way, he definitely can do stuff in like those much higher end missions, but he's always having to armor strip enemies first and do things in just a more plodding way. He's not like failing at any of these things. He's just doing them slowly, and he also is very greedy. If a lot of kills are being taken from Nidus, if you have like a more effective Warframe that's just like killing all these enemies, and then you get caught out having not been able to build your stacks or anything like that, and you just kind of can't do anything, you will die in those situations, and that is very unfortunate. He's just like a very greedy playstyle Warframe that is excellent for solo players that also don't want to be doing things like you don't need to do things in super, super fast. And you just want to hang out in their survival and just like have a good time and be the infested man. And that's all totally fine. And he works well for that stuff. But whenever he's competing with teammates or just like trying to, you know, be the best he can be, it's just, it falls a bit short, even though I think it's really cool. Nova, the just classically good Warframe Nova. No surprise to anyone, I'm sure, Nova is an A-rank Warframe. Nova has a number of different things going for her. She has her Molecular Prime, which goes both ways, which is to say that she gets a gigantic slow if she's built for it, or alternatively, and very importantly, she can speed up the enemies on the map. Regardless of which way you go, all enemies take double damage, which is a very solid increase, and whenever you're speeding those enemies up, that is usually used for like defense farms where you need to kill a lot of enemies very, very quickly to get through missions much, much faster. And no other frame provides that the way that Nova does. You can get a similar-ish, very tiny version of the effect from Equinox, but whenever you make it map wide and with the double damage, it just allows you to clear through waves on tons of missions super, super fast. And if you go the Slova route, it's very safe for like pretty much any other mission because enemies just aren't going to really be able to do anything to you whenever they're moving like 90% slower. There's just not much that they can do. I think it's 75%, but still, there's just not much they can do while they're primed, and you can just eliminate them. She could sometimes be considered to be a little bit unsafe, but through the damage reduction that you're going to get off Null Star, which is only to your health, unfortunately, but the defensiveness of this is usually enough that even if your shields get broken, your health is not going to fully deplete right away. Antimatter drop is usually just a helmet slot at this point. This ability just doesn't scale hard enough with your weapons. I will say this ability could very easily be fixed just with some new numbers, because I think that conceptually it's still very good, but it has fallen off. And then Wormhole. Wormhole makes you insanely fast. You get to do things very, very quickly because you can just be where you need to be right now, and that is always going to be good, especially for any missions where you need to go fast. Nova is one of the fastest frames in the game because she can just get from place to place nearly instantly, and that's just, it just comes together to be really solid. Time to talk about Nyx. So Nyx is extremely middle of the road, I would say. She has a few things that she can do quite well, namely the new Void Cascade game mode, where she uses her 4 with her augment in order to be able to walk around and stay pretty much invincible, but has a little bit of a questionable energy economy from time to time. And she uses her psychic bolts to strip all defenses from enemies at a very low amount of strength. And you can use Chaos to make it so that enemies are just not shooting your bubble as much, and this generally saves energy whenever you cast it, and is, generally good at, like, interceptions and all those types of control game modes. It can make enemies kind of ignore the point in mobile defense and so on and so forth. And you have Mind Control, which is more of a gimmick than anything else, but you can take control of some Eximus and get their effects from them, which is kind of a thing. And this is also notably the only effect where you can mind control enemies, and if you use like the augment and everything else on this, you can actually get a mind controlled enemy that can do stuff to other enemies, and this is like the only one that's like that in the entire game. That being said, it's not worth doing at all. Nyx is cool, and she does fine, and she does most content, like, pretty reasonably, sometimes a little slow because her 4 can be quite plotting, but she's solid. She's a B. She's all right. She's doing stuff. Doing fine, doing good, and that's okay. She's got room for like pretty much whatever helmet you want to throw on, because usually you just replace mind control, and that's great. And that can also fix like whatever problem she's really running into, because she already has an armor strip, so you get a lot more variety in what you can go for in terms of helmet in a lot of cases. But yeah, she's solid, but really not bad, not amazing. Speaking of not amazing, this is Oberon. Oberon is... yeah, I mean, let's not sugarcoat it. He's a C-rank Warframe. He is just absolutely middling. His 1 does percentage damage, and it never comes up. You can use it with the augment to get radiation damage. That's nice. That sometimes is used. And then Hallowed Ground. This, you put some grass down, you become status immune. That's okay-ish. That's like fine. And then Renewal, which you have to use with Hallowed Ground to get the full effect of, gives you a little bit of armor. It heals you and all your allies at a constant super high energy drain that increases per ally that you are healing. And it also is not enough healing or armor to really be very effective in the Steel Path, where you will still just die. And then you have Reckoning, which is a bad armor strip. Enemies need to be on hallowed ground to be armor stripped with Reckoning, so you're casting 2 abilities that cast slowly to get a bad, low-range armor strip on those enemies. And it's rough for Oberon right now. There was a time where Oberon was being used pretty consistently for Eidolons, and that time has very much passed. You could do it now, but there's not really much reason to do so. And unless you're playing... no, never mind. Yeah, it's Oberon. Yep, there he is. There's the goat. Speaking of the goat, I promise I won't keep doing that. This is Octavia. Octavia, as we are all very much aware, is an A+ rank Warframe. Been that way for a long time, but still nobody plays this Warframe for whatever reason. The reason is because her 3 makes you crouch a whole bunch in order to maintain its invisibility, and people find that annoying, and they also find her Manticore system confusing. But without that stuff, if you understand all these things and don't mind hitting crouch a few times, she has everything. Just absolutely everything. She throws her mallet out, enemies shoot this, and then it's just a giant AoE that instant kills all the enemies. Her Resonator literally turns off enemy AI. A number of Warframes utilize this through the helmet system to just make it so enemies won't shoot them, and it's a great survivability tool for that. Also, you can make mallet get taken out on a ride with Resonator, but usually it's better to just keep mallet in place. And this is her helmet slot, where you can put in whatever else you want, usually an armor strip. And then Metronome. Metronome has a million buffs. The important one is that it makes you invisible. There's also multi-shot, melee damage, armor, speed boost, everything else on this, depending on the various things that you do. But the important one is crouch a bunch, be invisible. Affects your teammates also, which is amazing. It's refreshable. Just great. And then, if all of that wasn't enough, her 4 is a huge damage multiplier that she gets to utilize. That is bolstered by her 1 and 3 being on and just more noise being in the environment. And this increases the range of your 1, which is highly effective and pretty much will just always be used. You get a ton of damage, scaling damage from enemies. You're invisible all the time. Your teammates are invisible. It's just, she just does everything. She turns your buff bar into a Korean MMO, and she just does everything. We get to talk about Protea. Protea is first and foremost my favorite Warframe, She is excellent. She has so much going for her, and in that she is my favorite Warframe, I almost don't even want to tell you all of the things that she gets to do, but I will anyway. So first and foremost, she gets Dispensary. Dispensary is basically the thing that says, I fix your energy economy, because this will just barf out energy orbs and health orbs and ammo and all that business, and this plus usually Energize, but even without Energize, is tons and tons of energy sustain for you to just build up a bunch of energy and never have to worry about what you're spending on abilities. Blaze Artillery is excellent. This is literally a turret that you place up that has a very short duration, but for every enemy it hits, it gets a damage multiplier. What that means is that it gets hilarious amounts of damage in a target-rich environment, especially when enemies are in a line, like, say, every hallway in the game. And it has heat procs on every single hit it does. So you get super hard scaling heat procs with multiplicative damage per shot that it fires. So if you build a bunch of duration, this does hilarious amounts of damage and will kill enemies at pretty much any level of play, as long as there's more than like one of them. And even if there's one of them in regular non-steel path missions, this will still just kill them anyway. And because you can build Protea with a ton of range, this can be placed in open worlds and just kill enemies at sniper-like ranges with no issues. This ability is fantastic and pairs really well with a grouping ability from Helminth, but is usually not even that grouping ability is usually not even needed, because Protea is such an avid user of Gloom, because her passive, every 4 powers you cast, you get plus 100% ability strength, making the usually somewhat problematic power strength cap on Gloom that can be hard to hit with also building a ton of range suddenly exceedingly easy. And you get that double strength on Blaze Artillery pretty often, because you can just spam cast these out. And if that wasn't enough, you get Grenade Fan. So you get not only shield satellites, which you can place down, and this will make it so that you have a longer shield gate whenever one of the orbs is on you. It also will constantly generate shields for you and anyone they're attached to, providing support to you, your party, companions, so on and so forth. You also get Shrapnel Vortex. Shrapnel Vortex are blade grenades where you throw them into an area and they have a large radius where they will constantly proc slash, which gets around armor and just kills people. So you get gigantic area denial, scaling damage off of her 2, and you get basically infinite energy economy with her 3. The only thing that's problematic is that Temporal Anchor kind of doesn't do anything. This ability is kind of reverse designed for Warframe, where you activate it and then you can rewind to where you were. There's just very few instances where you want to be doing that, but there's so many different helmets that are so good for her that it's not a big deal, and you just slap something over it. And even if you don't put something over Temporal Anchor, these other 3 abilities can more than carry the weight of one dead one. She is an A+ Warframe. Absolutely stellar in just pretty much all content. There are very few places where she does not work exceedingly well. Now we get to talk about a recent glow up. This is Revenant. Revenant recently got his prime and recently got some very important adjustments that are putting him at also A+. Revenant, I would say right now, is the premier tank Warframe in Warframe. That is because Mesmer Skin was recently changed, that each charge used to be every time you'd get hit, you would lose a charge, which meant you had to cast this over and over, and it was very hard to predict how many charges you were going to lose at any given time. The change that was made was that now there is 1 second minimum of invincibility between each charge. What that means is that this can give you a large duration of complete invincibility, and you cannot be status procced during it. So, Mesmer Skin is probably the single best tanking ability in the game, and it scales infinitely. Turns out that's good. Who knew infinite health was good? Could have fooled me, I guess. But then, besides that, we have a number of other effective things that Revenant can do. A lot of people don't like this build, me included, honestly, but Dance Macabre, it's just lazy AoE death. All low-level missions, you just spin around and everything dies the moment it sees you. It turns out that's pretty good. Generally speaking, I feel like a lot of people won't even bother bringing Revenant into low-level stuff because there are things that can clear better than this. And this is an ability that generally you would replace either with like Zada's Whisper or Roar or whatever else damage buff. But if you don't replace it, you can just use this as low-level clear, and it does a very good job. And like I say low-level clear, but I mean like everything except Steel Path. And even in Steel Path, you could do worse. But also, you could do better, which is the other thing Revenant has, which is Enthrall plus Reeve. Now, Enthrall on its own pretty much is nothing. This is just another mind control ability, and who cares? But Enthrall plus Reeve means Reeve will do double drain, which is percentage damage, which means if you have enough strength and you Enthrall plus Reeve, you will just instant kill enemies at basically any level. Which means this is an infinite scaling pair of abilities that also has an infinite scaling defensive ability, and then also usually an open subsume slot for whatever you want, be it an armor strip or a damage increase or who cares, or a good AoE ability for that not infinite scaling style. He's really good now. I don't know what else I can say. If you're not convinced yet, then I'm not going to convince you. Unfortunately, after talking about Revenant and gushing about how good he is now, we have to talk about the current state of Rhino. Rhino, longtime favorite, has been hyper relevant since the dawn of Warframe. Rhino has been hyper relevant. He is arguably the first S rank Warframe alongside Ember in the days of old. However, at current, I have to bump Rhino down to a B+. He absolutely has good builds where you can put together a very large iron skin that's going to be basically impossible for most enemies to get through, especially outside of the steel path. You will just be completely invincible, walking wall of death. And Roar is the best damage buff in the game outside of some edge cases. And it is extremely, extremely powerful, and Rhino gets the full power version of it, unlike anyone who steals it from him with Helminth. That all being said, Rhino Stomp really doesn't do anything anymore. It just is not the AoE it once was. And Rhino Charge generally has to be kept on only for buffing up Iron Skin and getting you to those really insane numbers. So mostly what you're getting whenever you go as Rhino is you're getting a really, really powerful weapons platform, plus a Helminth that works with that. And that is good. It's definitely good. And it cannot be understated how strong Roar is. Adding Rhino to a number of different parties as purely being built as high strength as possible, just so you can roar a teammate and increase all of their damage because it works on ability damage, is absolutely a thing that happens and is absolutely relevant. But Rhino's hurting department is in a steel path, where enemies can work through the hundreds of thousands of damage iron skin that he can put up. And whenever they can work through that quickly, the setup for it becomes less and less worth it. There are simpler setups now, especially with the like convert shields to armor ability from Helminth that I'm forgetting the name of right now. But you put that over this and you can get really easy, like a few, like 30, 40k iron skins up, which for all regular content and really like most like boss type stuff, except for maybe Archons, is going to be way more than enough to get you through any given mission. But struggling in Steel Path is pretty tough, and there are a lot of frames, like I've said with Nezha, and definitely Revenant, who are just doing what classically Rhino is known for better. Of note, I still absolutely 100% suggest every single new player farm Rhino. He is the best thing a new player can do right off the bat, and I 100% recommend him. But he's fallen a little bit short as time goes on here. And now, on the other bookend of Rhino, we get to talk about Saren. Most of you probably already know what Saren does, and it will come as no surprise that Saren is an A+. Wow, shocker, who would have thought that the frame that has Spores, which is a scaling ability that makes you garden the map as opposed to fight it, and builds up damage and just wipes out every living thing on the map through giant areas and just like between, like, doesn't matter what the map contains, doesn't matter how many walls there are, just like kill everyone in the entire in the entire map. Who would have thought that that would be the frame that's a good A+ Warframe? She also has Molt for going fast and a little bit of defensive stuff. Usually this gets replaced. Personally, I replace it with Gloom, because Gloom plus Spores plus a tanky built Saren has a unique thing going on where, because your Spores tick for damage constantly, an enemy needs to do, if you build for like tank Saren, which I have a video on, of course, that is the build video for Saren. And you can just, I added 5 blue Archon shards for health because it's funny, because Saren is so good that I can just put funny builds on her. You add that in, and enemies need to shoot you for your entire EHP in order to kill you, which means you can just be walking around and just using whatever weapon to spread your spores and just watch enemies die and not care whether they're there or not, and they'll melt shortly. With that, we use Toxic Lash, which is a big damage buff that makes you constantly proc a ton of Toxin. Toxin is a good status, and this makes it so that any hit you do to enemies will spread your spores, which is excellent. Also, this damage buff is just huge, actually. It's actually just like a really powerful damage buff, and you can also use the Spores Augment to get another damage buff on top of this one, and that's all super powerful. On top of that, we have Miasma. Miasma is going to put viral procs on all the enemies, increasing the damage they're going to take once again. And also, notably, the interaction with Saren is whenever you use spores on an enemy, they become a host. Hosts, when they die, will spread to all other characters in a radius. But those characters that it spreads to will not spread whenever they die. They need something else to hit them, like your weapon with Toxic Lash, in order to spread from them, and so on and so forth. What Miasma does is it turns every enemy in its radius affected by spores into a host, which means that Miasma hits them, increases the damage they're going to take, and when all of them die, you get the full radius of spread from spores in order to have it spread to a whole host of new enemies at greater and greater ranges, because the range of Miasma is very good. So you can just basically hit 4 and then just watch an entire map die. You just watch the affinity numbers through walls, and it is a very casual genocide for Saren. Sevagoth. Sevagoth is a perfectly good frame, and spoilers, he's a B rank. Sevagoth has a lot of interesting things going on, wherein he uses his Exalted Shadow, which is basically a second Warframe, where you are Sevagoth and then you turn into the Shadow, which has a whole different host of abilities and a very powerful claw melee weapon to be able to rip enemies apart and get damage buffs and do crowd control and all this business. And then you have like Reap and Sow, which allow you to build the meter for Exalted Shadow and so on. But then mainly you have Gloom. Gloom, the thing so many other frames steal, and really to great effect benefits a lot of the other Warframes that would otherwise have trouble greatly. This gives you big AoE slow and lifesteal for yourself and any allies in it. And then you use that to survive generally. And also the slow is the more important thing, because that's the big survivability. And then while you are in the Exalted Shadow, Gloom is still on Sevagoth's regular body. So you're just beating up all these enemies that are hyper slowed and like grouping them with Exalted Shadow and cutting them to ribbons. The reason why I give Sevagoth a B rank is because the survivability style of Sevagoth can be a little rough in higher level content, where when enemies kill you over and over, you'll have your passive, which is on death, you just turn into the Shadow, you kill a couple enemies, and you get right back up. And that is pretty much never really an issue. Like, it's going to be very rare to permanently die as Sevagoth, but it will happen over and over, and whenever that happens over and over, it really reduces like the efficiency with which you can eliminate hordes and hordes of enemies. So Sevagoth performs great, like a good performing Warframe, like does good stuff, but he doesn't really have any particular niches. He just performs at a good level for the vast majority of content, like solid damage increasing, like enemy damage vulnerability buffs and stuff. Like it's totally like you can use Sow plus Reap and like spam Sow and like do like, you know, kind of scaling damage for that and stuff. Like it's good. It's just not breaking through any barriers really in terms of like really getting to the higher levels of the frames that are in like that A rank that could do the similar things to what Sevagoth does, but better, and sometimes with Gloom. Styanax, somehow the second newest frame as of me doing this. We got a lot of frames right there at the end of the year. We have Styanax. Styanax is a B rank Warframe. I think some people will disagree with this, but overall, I think that Styanax is very solid, but does not really push the envelope anywhere crazy, especially after the few fixes / nerfs that he got. So first and foremost, he has Axios Javelin. This is generally the ability that you're going to replace. It is a grouping ability, but generally speaking, he really kind of doesn't need one for most of what he's going to be doing. And this is like a bit awkward to aim and such as well. Thero Strike, which is excellent defense strip. This is his subsume, and it's going to be good on a good number of different Warframes. This also will heal you, which is also quite nice. But mostly, just removing all of the shields and armor from enemies is super powerful and pairs well with the rest of what he wants to be doing, which is, you know, killing enemies. Then we have Rally Point. Rally Point gives you shields on kill, which is great, and also energy rate. Energy rate, just purely constantly generating energy. This means that Styanax's energy economy is quite good. Really, really rare to run out of energy as Styanax, and the constantly regenerating shields are going to be what's going to keep you alive. Usually this is still paired with like adaptation to get also damage reduction on top of it to make it so you don't have to rely on it as hard, especially because it is going to help your survivability whenever you are floating around killing everyone in Final Stand. Final Stand makes you jump into the air and then to throw 1 shit zillion spears and kill all of the enemies that you are looking at. It does kill, I would say, a little slowly. Obviously, like, you know, fully built up, like, it is killing, like, steel path enemies, but it is a bit slow for how vulnerable you are. It does take time to throw all those spears, but they do kill enemies because they do constantly proc slash on the enemies. So even if you don't do an armor strip to the enemies, it is going to work through them, even at steel path levels. If you use Thero Strike on them, this ability is incredibly effective at immediately killing anything that you are throwing these spears at. But with the limited range of Thero Strike, it's not like you can just, like, remove the armor from an entire tile and then throw your spears until everyone in that tile is dead. Usually it's a much more limited area that you are going to be removing the defenses of, and generally speaking, you're just going to build Final Stand to be strong enough to kill those enemies anyway and have it be a little bit slower. Generally speaking, the big weakness of Styanax is that there's a number of things that Final Stand just doesn't work super great on. Liches, Acolytes. Well, Acolytes, it works, like, fine as long as you do the armor strip, of course. But yeah, there's a number of pieces of content that, like, I feel like Styanax just doesn't do super great. You can, of course, bolster that a bit with removing Axios Javelin, adding things like Roar, so single targets against enemies that aren't particularly affected by Final Stand, and, like, a bunch of slash procs and stuff. Goes much better, especially whenever you also can't armor strip those enemies effectively or they have attenuation. He's good. Generally does things pretty well, but just isn't going crazy with it. Definitely a unique frame. Time to talk Titania. Titania is in a unique position. And she is in a unique position because she is the fastest Warframe in the game. And it's not close. Titania is frighteningly fast in that usually in normal missions, you cannot utilize her at full speed. She will often be faster than every other frame in a mission, and she won't even be sprinting. That incredible speed is backed up with not a ton else. Her Razor Wing, which is the speed with the augment, is fine. Its guns do reasonable damage, and, like, it will perform okay. But generally, her guns are a little underwhelming, especially because of the limited ammo. If they didn't have the limited ammo, it really would be a whole lot better. But other than that, she has Spellbind, which makes her status immune and can stun enemies, which is okay. Tribute, which is an overly complicated ability that really should only have 2 parts, which is to say it should only have Dust and Thorns as options, and it should be a tap and a hold. But that's neither here nor there. Thorns and Dust are the good buffs on this, which are going to help you survive and give Titania survivability. Normally, you will forego casting this because all the enemies will be dead with what we're about to talk about. But Full Moon and Entangle are really just bad things for you to cycle past, and they are worthless. Hopefully, at some point, the improvement to Titania is just that those get removed, and this becomes a tap-hold ability. That'd be nice. And then Lantern. Lantern can definitely crowd control a lot of enemies, and, you know, can sometimes come in handy, but generally speaking, just doesn't do particularly much. And the big thing on Titania is that you put Thermal Sunder on her. It doesn't particularly matter over what ability. Generally, it's over either her 2 or her 3. But you put Thermal Sunder on her, and you build for being in Razor Wing and using Thermal Sunder. This allows you to clear any map of regular level, usually not Steel Path, at blistering pace. And even without that, you get to do captures like in 30 seconds, exterminates, like doing void farming, doing all of your void storm, or not void storms, your relic cracking, and just like opening up primes and farming for prime stuff, and just doing all of that becomes exceedingly fast on good visors. It is extremely powerful, and I use Titania a ton because so often she is just the current best choice for so much regular low-level content, and not even really low-level. Like, we're talking, like, everything that's not Steel Path, and even in some cases Steel Path, you want to be using Titania. And it is extremely, extremely powerful. So powerful that I did consider giving her an S rank. However, I have given her an A+ rank because I feel that her weaknesses in Steel Path level content prevent her from being that high up there. And also because there are still a number of other options that are similar to her in terms of the super speed missions. Can she really be matched on those? No, not right now. Because she uses Thermal Sunder in the absolute strongest way possible. And she is just super fast and effective while using it. And of course, her 4 is like great for if you really want to like do like boss runs and captures and stuff like that. She can do all those things insanely fast. And just the raw speed of it all, and like whether it's like mobile defenses just being burned down by Thermal Sunders and everything like that, just being able to do missions so quickly is really, really just where she shines. And it's in a lot of missions. Let's talk about Trinity. So Trinity is an absolutely fine Warframe. Absolutely fine. She is a B rank Warframe. This is mostly due to her being able to use Blessing to make yourself and all of your allies, honestly, pretty invincible, giving yourself and your whole team 90% damage reduction, and also, any allies, particularly like Lures and Eidolons, also get that DR and that heal, is very, very strong. This is great survivability for yourself and the whole squad. And in addition to that, we have Link, which is more survivability for her, and also with its augment, this will strip armor, which is good. Unfortunately, this has that very unfortunate enemies affected limitation, which I really think should be removed from all abilities that have it. But this is more DR and also can armor strip a few enemies at a time, which is pretty good for her damage output. And then we have Energy Vampire. Back in the day, this was one of the single most important abilities in the entire game, but energy economies have gotten a lot better. And Energy Vampire is fine. Like, getting energy from this, if you start out a mission low and then you can just Energy Vampire someone and then kill them, get a bunch of energy and be on your way and give energy to teammates, I guess, if they really need it, which they usually don't. And that stuff's all fine. Then Well of Life, which basically does nothing. Pretty much this does nothing. This was recently buffed to make it so that it is kind of like a pillar where enemies can be near it and then they're immune to status effects and such. But generally speaking, even with that, it's just really not doing anything. And it's kind of just there. Overall, she is a survivability frame that gives like a semi-relevant buff to the team, but she really needs a bit more going on. Although, honestly, I will say, if you just removed the enemies affected from the entirety of Warframe, Link would be a really strong armor strip. Like with abating Link, you could do quite a bit, like a big like map wide, or at least the tile you're in wide armor strip plus Blessing. Like, that's really not too bad. I could absolutely see that making Trinity a lot more relevant. But right now, that's kind of just not the case, and she's good. She's good, solid, good for a number of different things. I like bringing Trinity like through Eidolons, very casual, very chill. And that's how she handles most content, is very casual and very chill and with a good gun. Valkyr. She was so close at one point this year to making it a bit higher than she's at. Right now, I have her at a C. And honestly, I would say she's mostly at a C on the back of Emergence Dissipate being nerfed into the ground, because her absolutely horrible energy economy was really being helped by that arcane. She could equip an armor strip and then use her claws to like assassinate enemies in Void Cascade and like be super invincible, and that was like really great for that game mode and like generally quite usable. But without the ability to generate a ton of energy and fix her energy economy, she becomes a very like mid very quickly, because not getting to use your 4 kind of defeats the purpose of this frame. Her paralysis is kind of a nothing ability. It really very literally pretty much does nothing. And then her rip line is just a gimmicky Spider-Man ability that can pull enemies and just generally be not as effective as just bullet jumping around. So she's got 2 abilities that do nothing, and then Warcry, which is her subsume that she can give to any other frame, and it's a melee speed increase and an armor increase, and it slows enemies, I guess. But this speed increase is both not really needed for Hysteria, and also better used by other frames, kind of because it's whatever to use it on Hysteria. Now, she does, of course, have a ton of armor, and you can just build her without going into Hysteria and just use a regular melee weapon plus Warcry. But at that point, it beggars the question, why aren't you just another frame with Warcry subsumed that can do everything that Valkyr can do, but better? Such as, let's say, Revenant, or any number of other examples in that vein. It is very unfortunate that her energy economy fix got nerfed into the ground. But you know, maybe we'll get the rework for her one of these days. One of these days. Vauban, a Warframe in desperate need of his 3rd, is it 4th? Major rework. Is it 4th? I think it's 3rd. In desperate need of his 3rd major rework, Vauban is the Warframe I am putting at C-. Vauban has a very interesting concept of just being like the gadget master, and really has, you know, just the openness to do whatever. But what has been done, or at least at the very least the numbers that go with it, are very, very underwhelming. You have Tesla Nervos, which you throw out, and they're these little electric shocks, and with the augment, they can do middling AoE damage. And they do like a little bit of stunning, and that's not great. Mine Layer, you get the Vector Pad, which is a meme, and not even as fun as Bounce used to be whenever we had that. You get the like grouping ability, which is a bad grouping ability. You get Flechette Orb, which can sometimes be utilized to be a damage thing, but it's like slow and not great. And then Overdriver, which just has hilariously low numbers and is quite ineffective. Then we have Photon Strike, which, speaking of hilariously low numbers and is quite ineffective, this ability without a full and total armor and shield strip just very simply does not do enough damage. And it's also slow, as you can see from its preview video. Yeah, it's a really cool like airstrike from space that explodes, but it's just too bad that it really doesn't kill anything. And then we have the only reason to play Vauban, which is Bastille plus Vortex, or more often than not, just Vortex. Remember that thing that I keep saying throughout the entirety of this review, which is enemies affected is stupid and should be removed? Yeah, here's another one of those times. Bastille is crowd control on enemies in its AoE, and then they get their armor removed over time. The amount of armor they get removed over time is laughably low. And honestly, if enemies just completely had their armor completely removed the moment they touched Bastille, that would be insanely better, of course. But right now, they might as well not have their armor removed at all. It's so slow. And then we have Vortex. Vortex sucks all the enemies towards the center. You can build this for very large range and have a huge area where it's trying to get the enemies to the center, and it is crowd controlling them, of course, while it's doing that, even if it is just pulling them into a wall in a corner somewhere where you don't see. This ability is just not super effective at grouping the enemies in a weird tile set. Fantastic in an open field, but also in an open field, you'll probably be shot from outside the radius. Vauban does not have any survivability on his kit besides the enemy is crowd controlled, and like the other frames where that's their whole plan, the new Xmas eat that up. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner, they're going to shoot you in the face. And that is real rough for Vauban, especially because his abilities, with Bastille having like no good armor stripping to be had, really don't do any relevant damage to any of the enemies. So you could throw a cool airstrike and then have the enemy kill you. It works in a lot of cases, and a lot of cases is why there's a minus here, because in some cases it's just real rough, and just if you get kind of like the wrong Xmas spawns, sometimes that's enough just to take you down, and it's tough out here. Hopefully we get rework 3 or 4. I forget how many in we are. We haven't had the 1 yet. Volt, the last of our starters. Volt is above the other starters at a pretty nice B+. The B+ here is because Volt is used for a lot of farms. He is a very good boss killer. He is the best for speedrunning Eidolons. He is great at doing Profit Taker. And also, with a lot of the general buffs that he has received, he is a much better starter than he was before, with being able just to carry his shield at no cost, and just like a million things that have been done here to make things a lot better. I still think that his discharge needs some adjustment in what stats it wants from you in order for him to really be able to shine. And even though everything here has been made better, namely Electric Shield being honestly the really big one, it's just not quite enough to push him right into A. Though, if you are someone where you feel like the most important content is stuff like Profit Taker and Eidolons, I could definitely see you weighing that more and probably putting him into your own personal A category. But for me, I don't think that content is so important that him being the best at those things is going to push him all the way up into like the high A tiers, even though he's also generally quite usable. I think he falls below a lot of our other just like general use frames that have other strengths going for them as well. Those being, since I guess we're at the end of the alphabet here, basically, you know, your Revenants, Nezhas, your Mesas, your Proteas, and so on and so forth. I feel like they all edge him out in those categories, and like Baruuk and, you know, the A rank Warframes, of course. But yeah, Volt, very solid, very happy with his new player buffs. Probably going to be choosing him for my next free-to-play through. And yeah, Varuna, our newest Warframe, the Warframe 51 Varuna. Varuna is very cool, and I think that her design visually and conceptually is great. And worth noting, she might get some more fixes that fix all the things I'm about to talk about, because she is a B rank Warframe. She has a playstyle that I think is absolutely like workable and is like pretty fine. But that playstyle is like insanely active for very little reward, in that it usually consists of you casting Shroud of Dinar a whole bunch, and then using the like increased status chance and all that business to do like really big AoE heavy attacks and kill all the enemies, or just do regular attacks, because honestly that's usually enough at most levels of play. Be able to do tons of damage and basically be Rengar from League of Legends and do some like assassination on all these groups of enemies that you're running into on whatever mission you happen to be playing. And that's all well and good. And that pairs well with what Like Its Hunt gives her, which is whenever you kill enemies with melee attacks, they will drop health orbs, and then that synergizes with Equilibrium to turn those health orbs into energy, which means you never run out of energy whenever you're doing everything I just described with Shroud of Dinar and assassinating enemies with melee weapons. The trouble comes through with whenever you're using Fangs of Raksh. The thing that this mainly does is it can kill enemies just purely with the status, and then on death, it will spread that status to nearby enemies. And the synergy with Like Its Hunt is it increases the duration of Like Its Hunt whenever you kill an enemy that has 5 or more statuses. Wow, who'd have thought this adds exactly 5? That makes you can keep up the duration of Like Its Hunt very reasonably. Fangs of Raksh, for whatever reason, though, is not counted as a melee attack. which means that it doesn't give you the health orbs, which would help you sustain your energy economy if you wanted to cast this a whole bunch. And the reason you'd want to cast this a whole bunch would be you could use it with Ulfrin's Descent, which is also a melee attack. Definitely look at it. I mean, it's a melee attack, but it is not counted as a melee attack, so you don't get health orbs whenever you kill enemies with this. Also, Ulfrin's Descent has a synergy with Shrouded Dinar, where you do not have to recast Shrouded Dinar whenever you are attacking with Ulfrin's Descent, which is cool, but because this isn't a melee attack, you don't get energy back, meaning the energy economy is horrible, and the baseline damage of Ulfrin's Descent is not particularly great. You get more damage whenever you kill enemies while you are using this, but the thing that honestly seems obvious, and I go over this in the builds video for her, is that both her 2 and her 4 should be considered melee attacks, and then if you kill enemies with Fangs of Raksh while you're in her 4, it should get the damage multiplier, and the slash procs from Ulfrin's Descent should spread off on enemies that you've affected with Fangs of Raksh, making her, you know, use her entire kit with Shrouded Dinar being the survivability with its synergy with Ulfrin's Descent, or having some way to refund the charges on Ulfrin's Descent to keep it going. There are so many things that seem obvious, like they should be these connecting pieces so you get to use her whole kit all the time and don't have to just resort to using her 1 plus her 3 plus a good melee weapon. But as it stands right now, generally speaking, you really won't utilize her 2 or her 4 very much because they're just kind of not worked into her kit the whole way in the way that seems kind of obvious. And that's real weird. I think if she had all that stuff, she probably would fall somewhere around A-, because that playstyle would still be, you know, like good but not crazy. Like it'd probably be at about the level of a Baruuk. But of course, those changes that I just said don't exist, and she's in the 3+1 plus good melee weapon area, which is definitely solid, and it definitely helps a lot that she's very fast in Shroud of Dinar, and can use the passive here to further increase her parkour velocity. Also, because I didn't mention it, she does have a different passive on each of her different abilities. Generally speaking, you're just going to use the Raksh passive, though, because the status effect immunity is very good. And unfortunately, this increased heavy attack efficiency. It is 100% increased heavy attack efficiency, but for some reason, she doesn't get to ignore the heavy attack efficiency cap, even though this gives 100%. So she still only gets 90%, which is mind-boggling. Maybe they'll fix that, too. Anyway, that's Varuna for now. Time to talk about Wisp. Wisp is the premium support Warframe in Warframe. And a lot of people would argue that this Warframe deserves an S rank because they feel that she is so much the best support Warframe that she's the only choice. But for me, S rank means that she would be pushing these other frames down. But the truth of the matter is that before Wisp, we already were not really using these support Warframes. She didn't push anyone down. They simply stayed where they were, and we got an A+ tier support Warframe. She does everything a support needs to do, which is give us a decent survivability buff, which is her vitality mote, a relevant damage increase, which is her haste mote, which is fire rate, melee speed, and also, very importantly, just general speed, sprinting around and walking around, which is all very nice, and then shock mote, which is like a minor stun. And that's all just on one ability. Outside of that, she gets to use Breach Surge, which is a very powerful blind and just general damage increase while you are shooting enemies, which is very good. And she gets Will-O-Wisp, which is a movement ability that she is invisible while it is casting, which gives her an immense amount of survivability, especially whenever you pair it with her 1, which is whenever she's not touching the ground, she's invisible. This does break if you are attacking while you are not touching the ground, but on-demand invisibility, because you jumped, is really, really good for a number of different missions, especially when you're speeding through missions super fast with Reservoir. And honestly, even if they could see you with Vitality Mote, you're usually going to be fine anyway. Her final ability is Soulgate, which is totally fine. I mean, the description of this ability says it does a lot more than it really effectively does, which is opens a portal to the sun. But this does effective enough damage to kill enemies at most regular levels and doesn't really do much to Steel Path level enemies. And this will normally get changed out for another relevant buff that builds alongside the same way that the reservoirs do, which is usually roar, because you usually are going high duration, high strength, and you can get an incredibly powerful roar, plus the fire rate, plus the speed, plus a huge amount of health, plus the stunning, and then add breach surge into that whenever you need it, and invisibility to that whenever you need it, and it is a super, super effective way to play. Wisp is effective alone, which is important for a support, and squads love to have her. All right, time to discuss some previous mistakes. Wukong was recently nerfed, albeit not massively, in that Celestial Twin now basically doesn't just allow you to AFK the game in a lot of different places. This was, of course, my mistake on the last roster where I did not rate him high enough, and I feel as though I did not rate him high enough kind of twice, because even still in his nerfed state, I feel as though he is an A+ Warframe, with the immense speed and still the effectiveness of Celestial Twin, who is still quite good. You just need to choose the right weapons. And the immense speed of Cloudwalker, and just like having Celestial Twin is still just enough. Great for spies, any fast mission. Cloudwalker is second only to Titania in terms of speed and ease of use. Although occasionally you will be a little bit slower in a straightaway than a few other Warframes. But for actual map navigation and missions that we're actually doing, which are not straightaways, Cloudwalker can only really be beaten by Titania, and it is a very comfortable way to do it. Celestial Twin, like I said, there's a number of weapons that are still used very, very well with Celestial Twin, and then the other abilities really don't matter too much. You get to subsume over whatever you want. Usually it's Primal Fury. Even though it's got a few buffs, I still feel like it's not enough, and Exalted Weapons in general, I still feel like need a bit of help, mostly in that their combo building and mods they have access to. I feel like they should have Blood Rush and such, but currently they don't, and the improvements to Primal Fury were not super major, and Defy, while a good panic button, is just not super necessary because Wukong's passive is 4 different panic buttons that all give you some random buffs. Whenever you would die, you instead don't. So not dying when you would die, plus super speed, plus a companion that is still the most effective one in the entire game, turns out to still be pretty good. Zaku. Time to talk about Zaku. This may come as a surprise to a lot of people that have sort of written Zaku off, especially in their early stage of development, where before they got a bunch of buffs. But I'm going to give Zaku a very eager A+. Zaku is excellent right now, and they do have an immense building cost. They not only need something from every open world, they also have a very restrictive mod set for what they are wanting to use, mostly because Grasp of Loki needs you to have maximized range. You want at least 265, which means you can cut just Cunning Drift in order to be at a comfortable level of range for Zaku. But once you do that, you get to utilize, if you can also get to 200% strength, which is a lot to ask, you get to utilize Gaze, which is a full defense reduction strip in a very large area, and then the scaling damage of the Grasp of Loki guns, which you also get more of with range, are going to be able to eliminate pretty much anything you come across. Great at all of the endless modes, really good at specifically disruption, is super solid, where these guns will take down disruption targets that you have properly stripped of armor and shields relatively easily. Although, of course, once you've stripped them of armor or shields, you could just shoot them too. And that stuff is all great. And that stuff is also bolstered in terms of energy economy by the Vast on Time. The Vast on Time you use, and then you get a large amount of dodge, which is usually enough to keep you alive as long as you're also doing some shield gating shenanigans, which I personally like to subsume Condemn onto Zaku. And then I have, you know, a very large shield and the ability to immediately put it back on whenever I want, which has worked out very well for me. But Zaku gets a giant AoE blast, which increases the damage enemies will take from the guns, so you can bolster any like damage that is not enough somehow, which I've never really run into, if I'm honest with you. But you get to do this big explosion that does that. It breaks all of the crates in the environment, making Zaku the best crate farming frame in the game, which is relevant for star hunting and doing a bunch of other things. And that's all great. But also, this will pause the timers on all of Zaku's abilities. That does mean that whenever you subsume something, you do not get this benefit, but for your 2 and all the parts of your 3 that have duration anyway, which is only Gaze, you're never going to use Accuse or Deny. They're both pretty worthless. But with Gaze, it pauses the timer for both of these, meaning you don't need to cast Grasp of Luck constantly, even though it has relatively low duration. You just need to keep recasting the Vast on time to keep both your 2 Gaze targets, because you get up to 2, and your Grasp of Luck going, which means you only need to invest, well, with no efficiency, 100 energy every usually like 30 seconds in order to keep your 2 and your 3 going, which is great. Also, Zada's Whisper. Zada's Whisper is a very powerful damage buff that has some weird interactions with a bunch of weapons, but Zaku doesn't really need it. This is good on a number of other Warframes, and feel free to use it as Zaku, but the vast majority of the time, your guns that are floating around you are going to kill enemies before you even get the chance to shoot them with a weapon buffed by Zada's Whisper. So it's really just not very necessary on the kit, which is why I like to go with Harrow's ability of Condemn, as it is a nice survivability add, and the crowd control is occasionally nice too. But yeah, Zaku is excellent right now. I will put out there that before the mobile client is out, I think that Zaku is going to be one of the stronger frames to play on mobile. So if you're planning on doing that a lot, this might be a good time to go get a Zaku. Ureli, you poor, unfortunate soul. So, Ureli has some issues. Namely, she has issues of her abilities just being kind of funky and requiring you to be on a K drive. And her survivability could certainly be better. So basically, the whole thing that is the current playstyle that works with Ureli is you use your 2, and you're on your 2, and you use your 3 with the augment only, and you get scaling slash procs that scale based on number of enemies you hit, so you just build a bunch of duration, a reasonable amount of strength, and you get some survivability from Marolina, and then you can do some okay damage with Aqua Blades. Her 2 was recently changed to be a reasonable grouping ability that is like fine and does well with the 3 augment, and her 1 is pretty much, like, even with the damage vulnerability, pretty much just useless, and you're going to put Gloom on her because she can have some survivability troubles that Gloom pretty much patches up. All that being said, the clunkiness of being on a K drive and, like, her 3 not being an ability without the augment, and even, like, the augment being, like, pretty limited in its scope in terms of, like, what it's really effective against, and her 4 being, like, kind of a mediocre grouping ability for something that's a 4th ability that costs 100 energy. It all comes together to make a C+ Warframe. She's fine. She's fine. You can do a thing, and if you like the things she does, like, you could make it work, but it's just a bit, you know, it could have been more, is all I'm saying, without going into my rant on what I wish Ureli was. And finally, we have Zephyr. And what a note to end on. Zephyr, in her current state, is excellent and is one of the frames I would recommend to all new players, as her build is so cheap and so effective and so powerful, and she is so good. She is an A+ Warframe, no questions asked, and not enough people are using Zephyr. Go out and Zephyr, because utilizing her tornadoes, since they have been fixed where you can place them in a certain area and then use your 2 to bring enemies into it, and then use the, if you hit any of the tornadoes, it does damage to every enemy in the tornado. Using that with weapons with punch through, such as the Fulmin for you new players, which is a very easy to access weapon that is very effective for this, or the Tenet Archiplasmor for people who are late at game, that very quickly and easily obliterates Steel Path level enemies. Just between her 4 and her 2. Her 3 is basically just invincibility from all ranged attacks. You can very occasionally, similar to Mesa, honestly, be killed by AoEs and melee attacks, but it is so very rare because also you're a bird and you can just be above all that shit. So Yeah, generally this just says invincibility while you do all of your war crimes, your tornado-related war crimes, to enemies. And then we have her Tailwind. Her Tailwind gives her a hover or a fast dash through missions, which is very useful in open worlds. I will say I replaced this for Breach Surge from Wisp, but this ability is good enough for just like getting around the tile sets and levels that I actually often regret the overkill ability of putting Breach Surge on her, which she honestly doesn't need anyway, whenever I could just be zooping around or like hovering or doing any of this stuff. So generally speaking, I would probably advise against even replacing anything, as she really just doesn't need it. Her kit is so good and so easy to make good. Really highly advise. If you haven't tried Zephyr for a while, probably give her another shot. She's so good right now. And with that, that is going to do it for the entirety of the roster. Hopefully this is not 3 hours long, because I had a lot to say about a lot of different Warframes, and I hope you guys have enjoyed it. Here at the end, I'd just like to mention again, thank you so much to all of my current patrons and my subs over on Twitch. I very much appreciate it. It's twitch.tv/Brozyme and patreon.com/Brozyme on all the things. And thank you so much to everybody who has supported me, especially in that me getting COVID right before I was going to make this video and having to wait until the actual new year to get it. Apologies for that as well. But thank you very much for watching. I hope you have enjoyed it. And yeah, tell me what you disagree with in the comments, because I know you disagree with something. All right, it's the start of a new year, and thank you very much to all of my current patrons for supporting me, especially now that the tier list is out and I with some troubles getting it done. But thank you very much to Brutus Salazar, Dylan Dworsky, Ethrain, Jacob Bean, James Hearththorne, JC4Science, Jefferson Clark, Joshua Adams, Luzanth, Malik X. Williams, Metrozanka, Mitchta, Nicholas Gridley, Paradise, Shan Harding, and Zach Zahner for being my super patrons. And thank you very, very much to all of my $5 and $2 patrons as well. It is hugely appreciated in support for the channel and, of course, for the site, which is going to be receiving many more updates now that the major tier list is done. There's a lot more work to be, added and done to the site. But thanks so much for your support, everybody. Much appreciated, and hope you enjoyed this year's tier list.